Tí ľudia to proste nedajú.
Podľa mňa oni bývali mariňári nejaký vojak.
Alebo presne tepať hovna. Ja neviem, lebo od teba to znie ako ešte väčšie totálne hovno, lebo si ho videl.
Čak to presne, on je ten typ, by som povedal.
Takže ty považuješ vojakov a policiu za totálnych neandertálcov, si práve povedal, ne?
Taký, že proste veľa čo si preskákal a teraz už iba slope doma.
Kriste páne. Ona nevyzerá ako človek, ktorý si niečo preskákal. On vyzerá ako pijan, ktorý celý život iba leňočil a popíjal svoje futra.
A to mi nejde do hlavy, lebo však vyzeral byť mladý na to, aby bol doma, vieš, že podľa mňa má nejaký skorý dôchodok, musel robiť nejakého hasiča alebo takéto niečo.
Tento tupec, on nemusí mať skorý dôchodok, on môže chodiť na poobednú, na nočnú, ja neviem. On nemusí byť doma.
Vždy je doma.
To najmä, či je vždy doma. Ja ho nesledujem, ako to máme vedieť, či je vždy doma.
Vieme to podľa toho, že v kuse búcha. Nie? Čo si aj ty zapečený ako štrúdel v rúre?
Nebúcha v kuse. Búcha vždy okolo obeda.
No a vždy je okolo obeda doma, tak to nemôže mať iba nočné pre celý život.
Čokoľvek môže byť. Môže byť na penke. Akorát.
4 roky?
Nie 4 roky. Teraz, v tomto čase.
Však si hovoril, že on búcha podľa teba 4 roky.
No lenže podľa mňa búcha 4 roky, lenže nevieme v akom čase. A to nevieme, či búcha. To je len to, čo si myslím. Búcha vždy z času na čas. To je jasné. Môže byť na penke, oj. To je vysvetlo asi najviac.
Hej, na penke isté.
Sa mi nechce veriť, že nič nerobí. To je celé.
Že by to bol boháč?
Lebo keby nič nerobil, tak by oveľa skôr začal stresovať. Keby toto videl ako reálne, keby toto videl 4 roky, každý deň, lebo je doma. Ty si reálne myslíš, že by toto 4 roky dokázal trpieť? Keby to videl každý deň.
A není ten, čo je na dvojke, jeho syn?
Aký jeho syn? On nemá žiadneho syna.
No ten na dvojke, čo sa ti stažoval, nie je to jeho syn?
Prestan trpať hovná.
Čo normálne sa pýtam do piči.
Ja neviem, či si robíš srandu alebo nie, ale nemôže byť až takto zaostalý. Si až takto zaostalý? Reálne, aké šance dávaš tomu, že ten na dvojke, že sused z druhého je syn suseda z 5. Aké tomu dávaš šance? Reálne. Chcem vedieť, akú vysokú demenciu máš v sebe, koľko budem musieť fixovať. Aké šance tomu dávaš podľa teba?
Však, ale keď sa proti tebe spoločím, tak musia mať nejaký...
Dobre, robíš si piču. Ja nemám naozaj za tvoje pičoviny. Tu riešime seriózne problémy. To je 27.7. Normálne ma hlava začala bolieť z toho, čo si povedal. Normálne ma z nej tak duní, keby si mi takou malou lopatkou pole bubkal. Holy shit, takú kokotinu zadre. No je to na dvojke jeho syn? Však to nie je ani vtipné.
Ja sa marím.
Čo som sa dožil, bo mi to treba.
To je firma, otec a syn.
Marian a syn. Tak to mohlo byť.
No sa to je z 5. Marian. To by veľa vysvetľovalo.
Nebol by som prekvapený. Tá možnosť tu je. A to by tiež nebolo ale vtipné. Kto je, ako sa,
Treba zistiť, ako sa volá.
kto je, ako sa volá? Tuším, že Minarovič má nejaké priezvisko.
Minárovič.
Idem sa pozrieť, idem skúsiť vygoogliť. Či ho nenájdem niekde na Google. Galbavého. Dúbravka. Ako reálne, tu nejaký Robert má nejakú firmu. Nakoniec naozaj môže podnikateľ, to má nejakú autodielňu alebo niečo a preto je doma. Preto je často doma, lebo tam nemusí byť. Lebo ja tam piču sa viac za neho.
A Robo sa volá Roberto?
Neviem, ako sa volá. A to nemusí byť on, hovorím, to je, tá šanca je malá, samozrejme. Iba hovorím, že s jeho priezviskom tu v Bratislave má piču s firmu. Ukáž.
Dve Gašpari.
Ťažko, myslíš, že to ten typ, ktorý mal firmu, autodielne, alebo niečo, čo to je? Autopartner?
Nie, však ja ti to hovorím od začiatku, že on je doma už isto.
Autopartner.
Lebo keď máš aj tieto poobedné nočné, tak máš aj ranné. To je...
Autopartner. Čo to je zač? Dalo by to zmysel. Dalo by to, nie je ťažké. Ako to, že je jednoduchý, to... Všetci sú jednoduchí. Tí, ktorí majú firmy, väčšina z nich je totálni tupáni. To je úplne v pohode to. Autopartner. Nevedem ani veľa informácií ďalšie.
Podľa mňa Robert, ak je Robert, tak je to jasné.
No lenže neviem ako zistiť, či je Robert.
Čo na zvončeku by mal mať napísané?
Zvonček môže byť, iba priezvisko sa mi zdá, že tam môže byť.
Tak dobre, ale môže tam napísať, že R. Minarových, vieš.
Pochybujem, že to menil.
A môže mať, ešte na stránke môže mať.
No nebude mať, lebo ti hovorím, že to bolo buď na jeho otca, alebo na jeho matku. A pochybujem, že to menil, tak ako ja tam mám tak ako ja tam mám meno svojho otca. Tak kľudne tam on môže mať meno svojho otca. Alebo tam má iba priezvisko.
Ale ak tam má meno svojho otca, tak podľa otca ho môžeme nájsť.
Autopartner.
Lebo stále možno po otcovi volá, čo zdedil, vieš, jednoduchý šmak, otec genius, do aut.
Jeho otec bol masívny pijan. To sa asi naozaj dedí tieto veci. Jeho otec bol masívny pijan. Tiež.
A ti hovorím, jeho otec mohol byť genius do aut, volá, čo šmaková.
Konec koncov aj tvoj otec popíjal, aj ty si dosť popíjal.
Ja som nepopíjal dosť.
No tak oproti mne.
Oproti ľuďom som nepopíjal dosť.
No lenže kto vie, aj tí všetci, ktorí s tebou takto popíjali, oni môžu mať tiež otca, ktorý tiež tak popíjal. Môj otec nepopíjal takto nikdy. Ako tvoj. Rozumieš, čo chcem povedať? Že to ich vysvetľovalo, že tento sklon k alkoholu do istej miery naozaj môže byť fakt dedičný. Lebo to je zaujímavé. To sa dá zistiť iba tak, že sa opýtaš, kto tam bol s tebou. Píškot, alebo kto tam bol tiež rozvalený. Opýtať sa, či aj jeho otec zvykol byť takto niekedy rozvalený v mladosti, to je jedno. Zdá sa mi, že môj otec
No jeho otec umrel.
Čo?
Píškotov otec umrel na alkohol.
Myslím, že sa rozlúskli tento ľahký rebus.
Piškotov otec, a počujem na to geniálne pýtačka. Piškotov otec, on proste popíjal, že vraj. Ale akože je to pravda, lebo to hovorilo veľa ľudí. A ešte jeden jeho kamarát bol svedkom a Piškotov otec popíjal a dal si nejakú stávku s tukanom, že skočí do váhu z mostu, skočil, ale sa nevybalil nikdy. Ani ho nenašli.
Ani ho nenašli?
Mm.
To je divné. To je divné. Možno len ušiel preč ani na Havaj si nažíva teraz.
Čo ja viem, keď mal 6 promile a bol skoro bezdomovec.
Možno to len tak náschol zahral, chcel utiec systému.
Jasne, to šance je, ale ako?
Lebo tak by som to chcel spraviť ja. Aj ma vyhlásili za mŕtvého, nemám pokoj.
Len teba aj vyhlásili už.
Neviem, asi ešte pochybujem. Ako to není zlý plán, neviem, či by to ale stačilo. Vyhlásiť sa za mŕtvého, keby si akože, keby to takto svedkovia povedali a keby si to natáčal a že už sa nevinujím.
No vyhlásajte za nezvestného prvý mesiac, 2 a potom za mŕtvého. Sú po nejaké doba.
No, že potom, keby mi to vyšlo, že to nie je ťažké spraviť potom. Nejako extra. Ne? No ale potom Potom čakáme policie o nejaké roky stretne v meste. Lebo mňa tam zvyknú zastavovať. To, že ma nezastavujú už pekne dlho, neznamená, že ma... Takisto je to o ničom. Ono by to malo zmysel, keby som nechodil, že vôbec von.
Však povieš, že si sa reinkarnoval.
Že poviem, kto som a oni. Počuj, táto osoba je mŕtva. Ty čo skúšaš na štriky? Ja nemá beru.
A ty povieš, no, očividne nie.
No, ako... Aj tak sa mi nechce vedieť, že to je také ľahké. Možno je, naozaj. Možno je. Ale to není to ľahké spraviť, pretože ty skočíš, to by si musel spraviť z opačnej strany. Vieš, čo chcem povedať? Z tej strany, kde ty to berieš kamerou a neuvidíš ma, aj keď sa vynorím, lebo sa vynorím z opačnej strany. Proste skočím a už nie je jasné, že som sa vynoril, už to tam nevidno. Lebo už som sa vynoril z opačnej strany. Tak minimálne, ono by to mohlo prejsť, lebo je vidno, že som skočil. A keď som skočil, no tak potom teda povedia, že lebo nikto som ako... Normálny človek, vieš, ktorý nemá dôvod takto utekať, nemá dlhy alebo niečo. Áno, to by podľa mňa neskúmali nejako hlbšie, mňa by neskúmali nejako dlhšie.
Ale že ty máš dlhy.
Mám, ale to je nič. To je nič, dlhy. To nie sú dlhy, to je nič. Ja nemám dlhy v podstate. To je nič.
Okay.
Ale to by nebolo aj tak riešenie, pretože ja by som s tým nič nezískal.
Že by ťa vyhlásili za mŕtvého a ty by si išiel naspäť domov.
No však taký bol samozrejme plán. Tak a mňa by nikto nikdy nevidel v podstate, rozumieme sa. Má sa im úspešne vyhýbať ľuďom, keby už o to išlo. Ale nemá to zmysel, pretože aj tak musím chodiť von. Keby som nemusel chodiť von, aj tak by to aj tak není dobrý plán, lebo hoci kedy v meste, keby sme išli alebo niekde, tak tak ťa môže zastaviť policajti a pýtať doklady, čo im povieš.
A od teba, keď pýtajú doklady, tak čo im povieš?
Ja poviem, že nemám pri sebe občiansky, ja dám údaje, oni sa skontrolujú a ideme ďalej. Čiže to nie, ty nemusíš nosiť občiansky vôbec. Im stačí nahlásiť rodné číslo. Rodné číslo a meno svoje. A ideš ďalej. Ty nie si povinný nosiť občiansky. To im povedal policajt, takisto.
Rodné číslo a čo druhé?
No meno im povieš, meno a rodné číslo. A oni podľa toho si ťa nájdu, či to sedí.
No, a rodné číslo začína ako? To je 1806, napríklad ja keď som sa narodil 18.6.98, tak to je 98061.
Áno, tak to bude začínať to rok ide ako prvý. posledné dve čísla roku, to znamená, ty tam máš, ja neviem, 9, 8, áno. Lebo ty by si tam mal mať 0,5. Lebo sa mi zdá, že 0,5 definuje, že si muž. To znamená, by si mať tam 98, 0,5. Alebo 0, počkaj, ako to, ja už nie sú žiadne číslo, 8, aké? Nie, nie je to tak, nie je to tak.
Nie,
Nie je to
číslo
tak,
máš
nie.
rok, mesiac a
Je
deň.
tam mesiac. A za tým lomítkom ide definícia pohlavia potom.
Áno.
Áno, 8, 2, 0,5 je ako posledné, takže posledné za tým lomítkom by si mal mať nejaké číslo a 0,5 by si tam mal mať.
Nie, ja tam mám 3, 4, 9, 7.
Potom tomu nerozumiem, keď tam máš lomítko 3, 4, 9, 7.
Mám, ja ho viem naspamäť.
To je divné. No, viem, že v tom veľnom čísle malo nejaké číslo malo definovať pohlavie, ale možno sa v tom mýlim. Ale síce možno... Aké tam máš?
3, 4, 9, 7.
3, 4, 9, 7. Zvláštne. Zvláštne. Neviem, ako to funguje. No v každom prípade dážim rodné číslo, dážim meno a priezvisko. Oni ťa naťukajú. Lebo nikto nie je povinný za sebou nosiť občiansky. Lebo to je logické, zase ako ľudia sú kokoti, ale až tak veľký nie. Lebo keď sa na tým logicky znova zamyslíš, však ti stačí, keď dáš tie údaje, čo máš v občianskom, ak ich vieš, a oni to už vedia pozrieť, či to sedí, takže znova. Problém je len samozrejme vtedy, keď nevieš svoje meno, alebo im nechceš dať meno ako ja. Keď mám zlú náladu a poviem, že aj meno nedám, nech si hodia mincov. Hodili si mincov, ale padla mi zlá strana. Ako tí policajti boli najlepší. Oni tomu dali šancu. Normálne si hodili mincov, neveril by si. Títo...
Jak to padlo?
Prehrali, padla zlá strana, ale snažil sa to zatajiť. Ale nedokázal to zatajiť predo mnou. Lebo ja som v tej záchytke, v tej cele za tými mrežami som pozeral na ňo, vieš. A on si hodil to mincov, on to tam tak tajne pančoval nenápadne, ale som ho hneď povedal. Podvádzate, pán, niečo som mu povedal, vôbec neviem čo, ale bolo jasné, že... A on to potom aj priznal v podstate istým spôsobom, že... Nepadla mu tá strana. Ako iba Tito je taký mánik, aby presvedčil policajta, aby si hodil mincov. A nakoniec som im to aj tak dal, pretože znova. A tak by som im to dal, lebo začali do mňa stresovať, že z toho môžem mať nejaké pokuty. Ako nie nič, nakoľko som im veril, nakoľko som im neveril. S tými pokutami minimálne som veril to, že dojdu ďalší policajti, lebo oni ma nemôžu držať dlhšie ako 24 hodín, no lenže znova. To dáva zmysel, tomu som veril. Lebo to mi dáva zmysel. On mi povedal, dobre, tak 24 hodín vás môže maximálne držať, lenže dojde ďalší policajti, dojde iná smena, tá si od vás znova vypýta údaje, vy znova nedáte a znova tu budete 24 hodín. A takto vás môžeme držať do nekonečna. A to mi dáva zmysel. To mi dáva zmysel. Tým pádom nemám šancu vyhrať tú bitku. Pretože to mi dáva zmysel. Ako po 24 hodinách si iní policajti opýtajú odo mňa. Takto môžu sedieť policajtov do nekonečna. A ja môžem kvaciť za tým mrežami do nekonečna. A takisto som im na jednej strane aj veril, že im môžu dať pokutu za to. Za to, že odmietam spolupracovať. A neviem, aj keď to je 50-50, to neviem s tým pokutami, s tým peniazmi, čo to na mňa skúšali. Ale minimálne som im veril, že môžu držať dlhšie ako 24 hodín, pretože dojde druhá smena, teraz si odo mňa vypýta znova údaje a čo? Zase ma držať 24 hodín. Ale vtedy som mal extrémne zlý deň. Asi som prehral v Lige kokotov veľa zápasov, sa mi zdá.
Čo zobrali vlastne?
No lebo ma zastavili, kontrolovali ma totožnosť, ja som im odmietol povedať. Odmietol som dať údaje. Oni ma zvykli dosť často námatkovo, ale po tej korone, od korony, naposledy ma zastavili vtedy, keď bol zákaz vychádzania, nevedel som o tom. Lebo bol zákaz vychádzania. Preto ma
A to
zastavili.
si im povedal, že nevieš o tom?
Ja som im povedal, že samozrejme, že o tom neviem. A vtedy povedali, že no nič, že to je pokuta nejakých 1000 eur alebo koľko. Pozerám na nich. Že odkiaľ zoberiem 1000 eur? Nemám 1000 eur, však som chudobný, ja som dneska ani pomaly nič nejedol. A on mi povedal, že nevyzeráte ako chudobný, taká stredná trieda. Stredná trieda, no. A nakoniec som zvolil, lebo som videl na nich, že to sú relatívne v pohode, tak som videl na nich, že s týmito sa dá dohodnúť, že keď im ustúpim, keď uvidia, že teda dobre, že pristupujem na ich podmienky, tak som tomu dal veľmi veľkú šancu, že mi tú pokutu nedajú. No tak som im povedal, že no tak no, keď inak nedáte, tak ja vám údaje dám a dáte mi tú pokutu, no čo máme robiť, Tak takto som im to prezentoval, Lebo som tomu dával 90% šance väčšie, že mi ju nedali, že mi ju potom nedajú, keď budem s nimi kooperovať, No a nakoniec mi ju nedali, povedali, že to je v pohode, chodte sa domov najesť. Im ľudia sa dajú odhadnúť. Proste to vieš, že s kým sa vieš dohodnúť. Proste vieš ako na ľudí, keď s nimi komunikuješ istý čas. Že aký štýl na nich hodiť, že či to sú takí, ktorí keď s nimi budeš spolupracovať a vidia, že si v pohode, tak ti to prejde. Ale sú potom aj takí, ktorí môžeš robiť, čo chceš. To tiež vieš odhadnúť, že OK, tak tu môžem robiť, čo chcem, ty to mi tú pokutu dajú, keď som sa rozsral. Takže ja som mal slinu na tých policajtov, dvoch, takisto. Pretože keby to boli imbecilové, no tak to by nebolo moc vtipné potom. Lebo ja si myslím, že keby som sa s nimi naťahoval alebo niečo, moc bránil, zdržoval im čas a podobne, že mi to pokutu boli schopní dať potom. Takže ja si myslím, že som zvolil najlepšiu stratégiu, akú som mohol. Ale znova, ako som povedal, tam som mal slinu na tých dvoch. Lebo tam ani som nemal nejakú inú stratégiu na výber. Že keby tam boli vlastne len zlí policajti, aj tak musím ísť touto stratégiou. Aj tak sa musím spoliehať, že mi to prejde, aj keď tá šanca bola pomaly nulová. Takže tam bola slina, že boss poslal týchto dvoch. Lebo tá pokuta im ma v živote, keby mi ju chceli dať, tak ma v živote neminie, pretože ma neminie, aj keby som im nedal doklady. A ja zistia, kto som. Proste to zistia, kto som do niekoľko hodín. Takže chvála pánu, že ešte tí policajti boli v pohode. Lebo hovorím, ja by som bol taký policajt, ja by som bol tiež to isté. Aj keby som vedel, že to je v pohode týpek, že to nie je nejaký tupec za jedno s druhým, ja by som nedal takým ľuďom pokuty, alebo niečo by som ich nechal. Takže ako sú ľudia, ktorí majú istú časť osobností, sú ľudia, ktorí majú niečo v sebe. A z toho som klamal, keď som povedal, že nie, to je jasné, ale je ich málo. Je brutálne málo. Možno nie je až tak málo, ako si myslím. Možno nie je až tak málo. Možno najväčší problém má s ľuďmi preto, lebo a nie je, že problémy, proste to sú kokoti na internete, ktorí si vyšlepajú na každého. Lebo naozaj, napríklad dneska v útorok sa mi stala veľmi divná vec, čo som takisto nevedel pochopiť. Zastaví ma týpek, si tu? Na svojej kolobežke sa zastaví pri mne, trút, silou mocou, aj keď vidí, že počúvam hudbu, aj keď vidí, že ho nepočujem, že či nemám cigaretu, ty kokos. Hovorím mu, že nemám. A predo mnou sú ďalší ľudia a pri nich sa už nezastaví. Tomu nerozumiem. Mňa sa ľudia majú báť. Prečo sa ľudia pri mne zastavujú a pri ostatných nie? To nechápem. Čiže ja vyzerám ako cigaretový lord asi. Ja vyzerám asi ako prefajčené hovno. Asi je, no. Asi si myslíš, že vďaka tomu, že som biely, že som fajčiar. Ja neviem. Musím vyzerať ako fajčiar. Ale pri ostatných sa nezastavil vôbec. Čo je divné. Pri mne sa zastaví pýta cigaretu a už pri nikom inom. Počuj, žena nestojí na tom balkóne, chod sa zašiť. Nestojí tam ako hovno, chod sa zašiť, no. Už to keby začali zadelovať, že to bude 1000 € pokuta. Počúvam, že to sa dejú veci. Normálne som v útorok von a mne sa to hned nestalo, že nikde nikoho, ty kokos, ani nohy. Žiadneho človeka som po ceste nestretol. Hovorí, že to je pohoda. Konečne žiadny človek vonku. Potom som zistil prečo. Ale aj tak som bol dosť zlo vonku, lebo to bola až cestou naspäť. Takže ja som sa dosť veľa polícií, dosť zlo vyhol. To bola až cestou naspäť. A už keď som bol tam dole, tam pri hrade v podstate už. Až tam ma chytili. Mne to skoro prešlo. Skoro som prešmikloval všetkých. Len tí jedni ma zbadali. Tam pri hrade. Nebol som ďaleko od toho, aby som to prešmykloval. Ani nohy nebolo vonku, ani nohy. No a potom som zistil, že je zákaz vychádzania. No Pičný Matovič je spolu. Zákaz vychádzania v noci. Čo je to za nápad? Tam niekde sa museli začať rúbať kvôli niečomu Sulík s Matovičom. Lebo Sulík je liberál, niečo ako liberál, ne? Podľa mňa on nebol moc nadšený z tých tvrdých koronasarčiek, ktoré Matovič rúbal, aspoň to si myslím. SAS sa mi zdá, že liberálna strana. Marianová strana. SAS, Sulík. Čo je to za strana? Pravicovo-liberálna strana. To znamená, že on nebol asi, liberálovia asi nie sú za tvrdé zákony, zákaz vychádzania a podobne typujem. Neviem, aj čo takéto tam muselo byť. Viem, že od tej korony to malo byť, keď sa začal Sulík naťahovať s Matovičom. Alebo to bolo, že aj od začiatku. Neviem, Pičus hovoril, ktorý Pičus to bol? Kolár to tuším bol, ktorý hovoril, že od začiatku mali problémy Kolár a Matovič s Sulíkom. A tak Matovič vyzerá tak, že sa nedohodne s nikým. Ne, Matovič vyzerá z nich najviac retardované. Ne, Matovič vyzerá, áno, ja viem prečo volil Fúz Matoviča, lebo Fúz je taký Matovič, on sa podobá na neho. Taký šibal, taký pičus, ktorý si z každého robí sračku. To je Fúz. Fúz mal ísť do politiky a založiť Fúzovo hnutie. Fúzová liberálna strana. FLS. Fúzová liberálna strana. Alexandra Sulíková. Aspoň, že Jan Sulík, Agáta. Kto môže dať meno Agáta? Agáta. Ako ja si myslím, že ich sa spoja veľa proti Ficovi. Ja už tomu dávam pomaly nulovú šancu, že Fico vytočí nuláka. Pretože oni sa radšej spoja, už si začína myslieť, že radšej sa spoja až 5. Radšej sa spoja 5 dokopy. Oni podľa mňa brutálne neznašajú Fica. Oni tam podľa mňa niektoré také strany ako Kolár a KDH, ak sa dostanú do parlamentu, ono je to tesne, všetko záleží od toho, kto sa dostane do parlamentu. Lebo títo pičusovia, tu sa strašne veľa strán hýbe veľmi tesne. SNS okolo 5%, SAS okolo 5%, KDH okolo 5%, Kolár okolo 5%, hej. Aj Matovič má okolo 5%, ani Matovič sa nemusí dostať tam. Ukazujú mu ste 7, ale to je jedno. Ani Republika sa teoreticky nemusí dostať. Ako tie prieskumy, že ukazujú 8, 7, to je nič. To sú prieskumy, to sa môže líšiť o 2-3% v kľude. Takže tu je v podstate jediné strany, ktoré vnímam, že sa dostanú do parlamentu na 100%, je Hlas, Smer a PS. Hej? No a potom, ak sa nedostane nejaký Matovič, no Matovičom kooperovať nikto nechce, takže to je úplne jedno. Hej? Ak sa nedostane do parlamentu, povedzme, Republika, alebo SME, alebo KDH, tieto voľby budú najzaujímavejšie. Lebo toto není otázka, kto vyhrá, alebo kto bude mať veľa. Títo traja budú mať podobne. To sa bude líšiť podľa mňa o 2-3% a hore, možno 4%. Toto nie je zaujímavé, lebo títo budú mať vždy cez 10%. Ne? Smer, PS a Hlas budú mať vždy cez 10%. Otázka je, koľko z týchto piču sa dostane do parlamentu? Z týchto SNS, SAS, lebo aj ľudová strana, aj Kotleba, to, že mu ukazujú 2,6, on kľudne môže tých 5% dať, rozumieme sa. Alebo títo demokrati, to sa môže líšiť o 3%, to sú len prieskumy, to je nič. Takže bude zaujímavé, bude sledovať tieto strany. Tieto zvyšné, kto z nich sa dostane a kto z nich sa nedostane. Lebo znova, ak sa dostane SAS, ak sa dostane Kolár a bude mať povedzme 7, SAS, ja neviem, 6, PS získajú povedzme o 3% a viacej, že dajú nejakú 18, tak oni sa spoja. Ak to bude možné bez Matoviča sa spojiť proti Ficovi, tak sa spoja. A ja si myslím, že to bude možné. Ako oni bude to zaujímavé, je to tesné. Všetko záleží od toho, koľko získa oni. No, jak sa volá? Uhrík. Všetko záleží od toho, koľko získa Uhrík. Lebo s Uhríkom nechce ísť nikto. V podstate títo kokoti neznášajú Fica, neznášajú Uhríka a neznášajú Matoviča. To sú 3 čierne ovce. Uhrík, Fico a Matovič. Nikto nechce ani s Uhríkom, ani s Ficom, ani s Matovičom ísť do koalície. No a teraz je otázka teda, že či...
A prečo nechcú s Uhríkom?
No o tom som ja presvedčený, tak Uhríčik to je ešte horšie ako Fico. Uhrík presadzuje oveľa tvrdšie pakety. A Uhrík je oveľa viacej proruský ako Fico, myslím. Minimálne to isté. To je mladý Fico, dá sa povedať.
Hlavne preto, lebo sú proruskí.
Presne tak. Proruský. A čo sa týka Pellegriniho, Pellegrini je prípada taký, že on aj není moc proruský, neviem. Pellegrini vyzerá, ani nie že proruský, ale to, čo prezentujú, to prezentujú aj Rusi. Bo to len rozumieš, čo chcem povedať. Ja napríklad nie som proruský, ja nie som nejaký obdivovateľ Putina, Rusov, nejako extra. V podstate...
Ty si neutrál.
Lebo mne sa brutálne rentuje aj oni. Mne sa rentuje viac ako Putin, sa mi rentuje ten pičus. Americký Trump. Trump sa mi brutálne rentuje, takže nemôžete mne povedať, že som proruský, keď sa mi rentuje viacej Trump ako Putin. Ne? Len tie zásady, ktoré ja mám, tie sa zhodujú s ruskými. No a podľa toho ťa v podstate oni prirovnajú k Rusom, lenže to neznamená, že to sú ruské zásady. To sú zásady, ktoré prezentujú oni a ja. To takisto môžeme nazvať Titovové zásady. Rozumieš, čo chcem povedať? To je proste dokola to isté. Mne sa rentuje aj Trump, lebo Trump je veľmi veľký šibal. Jak Trumpek hovoril, že keby som bol ja prezident, Vladimír by si v živote nedovolil robiť ten útok. Ja som s ním stretol a som povedal, ja tu mám tiež gombík, ktorý môžem stlačiť. Ti hovorím, Vladimír, ak to spravíš, tak bohužiaľ. Takže Putin, ja si tiež myslím, že Putin by v živote nezautočil na Ukrajinu, keď bol prezidentom Trump. Lebo ten Trump, oni to aj hovorili, že ten Trump je podobný psychopat ako Putin. On psychopat, vieš ako to myslím, podobný drtič ako Putin, tak to volajme. Proste on tiež nemá problém pustiť na nich atomové hlavice. No a vie to, Putin to vie. Vieš, Putin vie, že ak pustím atomové hlavice, ak zautočím, brutálne Trump sa do mňa pustí naspäť. Tak by to neurobil, tiež si myslím, že by to neurobil. Vieš to, hento hovno Biden, to je bidet, rozumieme sa, to je nič. Takže Trump sa mi neskutočne ráta, no. Lebo on aj celkom vyzerá byť, že má niečo v tej gebeni, tak to povedzme Trump. Takže to nie je, že ja som proruský alebo proamerický, ja stojím s tým, kto hovorí rozumne, kto je na istej úrovni šmak. Ja stojím vždy za tým, ktorý má istý šmak v hlave. Hej. Putin má istý šmak, preto nemám problém stať za ním, lebo z neho mi tiež ide, že to nie je tupec. Hej. No ale bohužiaľ, keď sa pozriem na Matoviča, na jeho prezentáciu, na to, čo robí, na to, čo hovorí, s Matovičami šmak nejde, ani s Kolárami šmak nejde, ani s Uhríkami bohvie, aký šmak nejde. Hej. V podstate ani s Ficami bohvie, aký šmak nejde. Ide mi tam kúsok šmaku z Fica, kúsok, ale to je málo. To nie je taký šmak, aby som sa na ňo, aby som silou mocou priklonil za ňo. Zo slovenských politikov, takto to povedzme, nemá nikto taký šmak, ako má Trump, alebo ako má Putin. Hej. Takto ja vidím. Môžem sa mýliť, samozrejme, možno Uhrík, alebo Fico, alebo ja neviem, možno Pič, Matovič je geniálny šmak. Neviem. Ale tí, čo majú šmak, to je Trump a Putin. Tí majú šmak. No a preto hovorím, že keď bol Trump prezidentom, tá Ukrajina si tiež myslím, že by sa nestala. Putin by do nich nešiel. Ale to ide aj o to, že Putin by nemal dôvod do nich ísť. Lebo Trump by nerobil to, čo robil Biden. Trump sa vedel s Putinom dohodnúť. To je tá vec. Oni vedeli spolu komunikovať. Hej. Trump by netlačil na to, aj bola Ukrajina v NATO. Takže tá vojna by nenastala nie kvôli tomu, že obidvaja sa rešpektujú navzájom. Nie. Tá vojna by nenastala kvôli tomu, že Trump by nechcel tú vojnu spôsobiť. Lebo tá vojna začala kvôli tomu, že Biden chcel tú vojnu. Ne? Chcel ten konflikt. Voláme to ako konflikt. Ne? On chcel ten konflikt, lebo ako som povedal, on chcel ťažiť. Ne? Takže, a Trump to povedal veľmi dobre. V momente, ako budem prezident, ukrajinský konflikt skončí do 24 hodín. Prestaneme im posielať zbrane a povieme im jednoznačne, dohodnete sa, žiadne zbrane už nebudú, musíte uzavrieť prímerie. Trump to povedal veľmi jasne. Dostal standing ovation. A takisto to povedal dobre si tu.
No.
Takisto to povedal ten Američan Tucker tiež veľmi dobre aj s Trumpom, že ja si nepamätám, že nejakí Rusi by zabíjali Američanov. Za posledné 3 roky viem o 0 ľuďoch, ktorí zabili Američanov Rusi. Že takisto nerozumiem, prečo nás niekto silou mocou ťa núti niekoho nenávidieť. Však ako Američania máme fundamentálne právo sa rozhodnúť toho, koho budeme nenávidieť podľa toho, čo si zistíme, podľa toho, ako sme na tom. Kdežto takí Mexičania zabijú denne 70,000 Američanov tým, že mexická vláda dovolí púšťať fentanyl a neviem aké drogy a to zabíja Američanov, lebo si myslí, že to je nejaký bezpečný liek alebo niečo a 70,000 ich zomre. Prečo nenávidíme Rusov a Mexičania sú v pohode. Hej? Takže ako, tieto veci sú veľmi vtipné tam. Že vlastne ich nútia nenávidieť Rusov a pritom Rusi im v podstate nič nerobia Američanom. No. Absolútne nič. Je to škoda, no Amerika hlavne zlyhala na tom, že ten prezidenta tam dali toho, akého dali. To spôsobilo všetko. Že ten Biden chcel ten konflikt vyvolať. No. Vieš, že keď chce americký prezident vyvolať konflikt, vieš, Američania sú dosť silný štát na to, aby ak chcú vyvolať konflikt s niekým, no tak ho vyvolajú, pokiaľ to prezident chce. A to je dosť veľká super veľmoc. Ale najlepšie bolo, aké hovorí, ak sa bavil s tým korejským. Nie, s Mexičanov, jak one. Že počuj, stávam hranicu, povedal som mexické vláde, stávam dole veľkú bariéru, stávame dole na Mexicko, stávame, ako sa to volá? tú stenu stávame, aby nechodili nelegálne z Mexika, hej. A tam mi povedal, že potrebuje od mexickej vlády 28 000 vojakov. Si tu, hej? Si tu? Si tu? Kam odišiel zase? Kam odišiel zase ten pičus? Kam chodí hore dole?
Tu som.
No. No a Trump stával dole stenu, stával dole stenu medzi Mexikou a Amerikou, aby nechodili nelegálne, hej? Si tu?
No.
No. A povedal mexickej vláde, že potrebuje 28 000 mexických vojakov, aby to strážili, hej? A mexické vláda povedala, že to je príliš veľa, že nemôžu mu to dať. A Trump hovorí, že ja som im povedal, že dobre, to nemôžete dávať, že tuto nejaké, aj tak nám kradnete nejaké nelegálne auta, jedné som im povedal, že dobre, zvyšujeme taxu na auta, zvyšujeme taxu na hento, všetko pôjde teda o 50-100% hore. A že mexické vláda hovorí, ja, dobre, 28 000 vojakov, to je nič, dáme vám ich. Ti hovorím, Trump je úplný maník. Alebo že sa bavil s nejakým korejským prezidentom alebo s niečím. A tam tiež niečo vtipné nastalo. A ten mu povedal, že dobre, vy máte atómové zbrane, ale ja mám tiež taký gombík, ktorý reálne tiež funguje. Že ale môj gombík funguje. A že tiež sa mu nejako aj Korečanom podarilo dať do laty. Ako Trump je strašný mánik. Sa čudujem Američanom, že ho nezvolili už predtým. Mohli sa vyhnúť tone problémov. Ťažko povedať, či tie voľby boli zmanipulované alebo nie. Trump hovorí, že tie voľby boli sfalšované tam. Ťažko povedať, ale čudujem sa im, že zvolili Bidena. Lebo oni to aj hovorili, že to bolo divné, že zvolili si za prezidenta niekoho, kto nevie ani hovoriť, ani žiadnu volebnú kampaň nemal. A vyhralo 15 miliónov hlasov. Je to divné. Ty koho budeš voliť? Pôjdeš voliť? Pôjdeš voliť so Šmakom? Marianom KDHčko? Pôjdeš voliť KDHčko ako správny kresťan?
A ty?
No, ja by som nešiel voliť, ani keby som mal občiansky. Alebo keby som mal občiansky, mohol by som si teoreticky, keby som silou mocou chcel hodiť si mincov medzi kým, ale Uhrik sa mi nerentuje, lebo z neho mi moc ide to, že to robí pre seba, aby zarobil. Fico si zarobil dosť. Tam sa není medzi kým rozhodnúť. Fico si zarobil dosť, Uhrik sa mi nerentuje a potom som skončil z možností. Kotlov by som nemohol voliť už iba kvôli tomu, že si myslím, že sa do parlamentu asi nedostane. A dajme tomu, že by dobre, mohol by som si povedzme medzi Kotlebom hádzať. U Kotleba vyzerá byť ako slušný házec a vyzerá, že ešte nejaká tá koronka mu bodla. Vyzerá, že ešte nie je dostatočne zazubaný. Dobre, dajme tomu Kotleba, dajme tomu, že by prichádzal do úvahy. Ale nemám druhú možnosť potom. Ne, PS to sú kokoti, to sú pičisovia. To sú prezidentky, ne armáda. A prezidentka je najväčšie zlo. To už radšej by som, keby som si mal vybrať, koho zastrelím, či Čaputová alebo Matoviča, tam není o čo riešiť. Čaputová je oveľa väčšia sračka ako Matovič. Čaputová je neskutočná zradkyňa najväčšieho zrna, ešte väčšia ako Matovič. A PS je jej strana. To je jej strana. Ako môžeš povedať, že by si zavolil tých pragmatikov Čaputovej? To je najväčší zradca republiky Čaputová. A preto mi je úplne nepochopiteľné, ako môže mať najväčšiu dôveru od občanov Čaputová. Oni vôbec, tí ľudia sa zaslepení, nevnímajú. To znamená, ja by som si hádzal mincov. Iba Kotleba prichádza do úvahy. Je iba Kotleba. Z SNS tam nepoznám nikoho, tam neviem už ani kto je. Kotlebu ako tak ešte poznám, videl som mu vyjadrovať sa. Je to tiež račka, podobne ako ja, takže nájdeme si niečo spoločné. By som si teda hádzal mincu. A tá otázka by znela, pôjdem voliť Kotlebu alebo nepôjdem voliť, hej? Takže keby som mal občiansky, tak by som si hádzal mincov, či pôjdem alebo nepôjdem voliť Kotlebu. Rozhodne boss. Hej? On jediný prichádza do úvahy. Ako z Uhrika mi ide, ako Uhrik sa mi rentuje, ale Strašne mi z neho ide, nemôžem si pomôcť, strašne mi z neho ide to, že sa chce zazobávať. Že proste hovorí to, čo si myslí, že mu najviac prinesie peňazí. Snaží sa stať obľúbencom, čo na obľúbencov. No. A Fico, z Fica mi nejde nič. Z Fica mi ide pohoda. Lenže on vytočil dosť nulákov, Fico má dosť peňazí, nie je dôvod dovoliť. Ešte taký Kotleba, ja si myslím, že Kotleba nemá tak toľko peňazí ako Fico. Kotleba by si ešte zaslúžil pár drobných. Aj keď Kotleba sa do parlamentu nedostane. Lebo ten problém je v tom, že Uhrík odišiel od parlamentu. A Uhrík mu odišiel od Kotlebu. A Uhrík mu strašne veľa hlasov zoberie. A preto sa ľudová strana naše Slovensko nedostane. Už asi do parlamentu. Typovne sa nedostanú.
Počkaj, Jurik bol s Kotlebom?
Áno, Uhrík bol s Kotlebom. Však Uhrík aj ten piču, z toho si ty hovoril, ten holohlavý. Ako sa volá ten holohlavý? Ty sa spomínal raz. Holohlavý, to je s Uhríkom. Ty si jeho prezvisko vedel lepšie pomaly ako ja. Vieš toho myslím, to svalnatého holohlavca.
Mazurek?
No, Uhrík a Mazurek boli u Kotlebu, lenže odišli, lebo videli, že Kotleba stráca na obľúbenosti a že ich stiahne zo sebou dole. Tak v podstate Mazurek a Uhrík opustili potapajúcu sa loď a vytvorili si vlastnú stranu. Republiku. Lebo oni videli, že Kotleba je príliš tvrdý. Že príliš sa prezentuje ako taký malý Hitler. A vedeli, že to nebude mať úspech. A preto odišli a preto sa prezentujú úplne inak, lebo rozumieš, robia to, čo vedia, že im vyťaží najviac. Stále si stoja v podstate za tým, čo je Kotleba, ale neprezentujú to až tak tvrdo. Jemnejšie prezentovanie, také, aby to človek bol schopný spracovať. Ja si myslím, že hovorím. Ale ma tieto voľby budú zaujímavé, lebo tam je strašne veľa strán, ktoré neviem, či sa dostanú do parlamentu. Už to vyplo? Už to vyplo. Tam je v otázke strašne veľa strán. Kde to bolo ten graf? Kde bol ten graf? No povedzme, aj tu je ten graf. Máš 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, máš 6 strán. Každé jedno z tých, tuto nevieš, koľko z týchto strán sa dostane do parlamentu. Týchto 6 strán bude najviac rozhodovať. Títo sa budú hýbať okolo 20% každý z nich. Tuto budú 3% hore-dole. Ten smer môže mať 15, tento môže mať 19. Toto sa bude hýbať, každá z týchto sa dostane do parlamentu a budú mať okolo 15 až 20%. Ne? To sú nepodstatné strany. To sú Čaputovci, a toto je Pellegrini a toto je Fico. Ne? Tak by to malo byť. Ne? No a títo budú rozhodovať. Všetko záleží od toho, koľko z týchto pičusov, kto sa z týchto pičusov dostane do parlamentu. Lebo ak sa dostane, povedzme, KDH, SME, SAS, no tak potom tá koalícia bude jednoznačná. KDH, SME, SAS, PS a Hlas. Ne? No lenže ak sa nedostane, povedzme, ja neviem, KDH, a namiesto KDH sa dostane Republika s nejakým slušným počtom, tak potom sú v prdeli. Lebo potom nemusí stačiť SME, SAS, PS a Hlas. Oni nemusí stačiť. Ne? No a nikto nechce Uhríka, nikto nechce Fica, nikto nechce Matoviča. Matoviča nikto nechce, lebo si pokazal reputáciu. Takže pointa. Nikto nechce Republiku, nikto nechce tohto, nikto nechce Fica. No lenže znova. To záleží všetko od toho, kto sa dostane, kto sa nedostane z týchto pičusov. Lebo neverím tomu, že všetci z týchto pičusov dostanú. Podľa mňa dve z týchto 6 strán sa aj dostanú. Podľa mňa sa do parlamentu dostane 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 strán. 7 strán. Podľa mňa dve strany z týchto padnú. No a teraz, ak padne povedzme KDH a Matovič, alebo keď padne KDH a Kollár, keby títo padli, že nemajú na to. A dostane sa tam SNS tesne. SNS, Republika, SASP, tak sa dostane To záleží od toho, kto je z týchto strán padnú. ak padne SNS a Republika sa nedostanú obidva, no tak potom to bude veľmi jednoduché. Lenže ak padne iba SNS, a z SNS padne KDH, alebo Matovič, alebo Kolár, no tak potom sme veľmi na hrade znova. Takže toto bude zaujímavé. Títo piči sa budú rozhodovať. Tí piči sa budú rozhodovať. No je to ťažký čas. Ťažký časy prichádzajú. Takže rozumieme sa. Rozumieme sa, ako to je. Preto hovorím, že tieto voľby budú veľmi, veľmi zaujímavé. Ja ich vnímam ako najzaujímavejšie voľby v celej histórii. Pretože je to tak veľmi, veľmi, veľmi vtipne rozložené to je. Pretože predtým každý neznášal len jedného, len Fica. Okay. Každý neznášal len Fica. Fico bol jediná čierna ovca. Lenže teraz máš 3 čierne ovce. 3 čierne ovce v parlamente, ktoré nikto nechce. No a to je priveľa čiernych oviec. A tá situácia môže byť taká, že jednu z tých čiernych oviec budú nútení zobrať. No a tam to začne byť zaujímavé. Ako Uhrík, Matovič, Fico. Ako Matoviča nezoberie nikto. To, ako podľa mňa Matovič je najväčšia čierna ovca. S ním do koalície podľa mňa nepôjde ani hovno. Ešte možno sú schopní prekusnúť Uhríka. Možno sú schopní prekusnúť Fica. Ale Matoviča neprekusnú určite. A nemyslím si, že prekusnú Fica alebo Uhríka tiež. Ale tam to bude záležať od tých strán, ktoré sa hýbu na úrovni 5%. Od nich to bude záležať. Toto budú najzaujímavejšie predčasné voľby. Neviem, či vôbec niekedy boli predčasné voľby. Možno jedni boli? To. Ťažko povedať.
Female horse. You need to choose with careful consideration.
Ťažko povedať. Ale pre mňa to budú najzaujímavejšie voľby. A celú históriu. Bezkonkurenčne. Pretože teraz vôbec neviem, kto tam bude. Kto bude vo vláde. Tam reálne nemusí byť Pellegrini. Tam nemusí byť Fico. Tam nemusí byť, ani pragmatici tam nemusia byť. Teraz absolútne nevieš. Tu hocikto môže byť vo vláde a hocikto aj nemusí tam byť. A preto to je zaujímavé. Lebo teraz nevieš, kto bude vo vláde a kto nebude. Teraz nemá nikto istotu, že založí vládu. Nikto. Pellegrini tam nemusí byť, Fico tam môže byť, Pellegrini tam môže byť, Fico tam nemusí byť. Nemusí tam byť ani Fico, ani Pellegrini takisto. Tam, ak pragmatici získajú nejakých 21-22%, čo teoreticky môžu, ne? No tak potom teoreticky, ak to tam klapne v tých ostatných, môžu spraviť koalíciu aj bez Pellegrina, aj bez Fica. Možno si povedať, že Uhrík sa ľahšie prekusne ako Pellegrini, ne? A ako Fico. Zoberie Uhríka so sebou. A Uhrík to zoberie, lebo ako hovorím, Uhrík je tam na to, aby sa zazobával. Ne? Takže hovorím, tam môže byť hocikdo a hocikdo tam aj nemusí byť. Ja neviem, ako veľmi neznašujú Uhríka. Hovorím. Ale myslím si, že preferujú radšej Uhríka ako Fica. Možno aj viac ako Pellegriniho, kto je. Ale viem, že majú problém hlavne s Ficom, Matovičom. To To sú najväčšie čierne ovci. Najväčšie čierne ovce. Fica, Matoviča nemá nikto v obľúbe. Taký je fakt. Takže už keby som silou mocou chceli zvoliť, tak by som si hádzal Kotlebu. Voliť Kotlebu, nevoliť Kotlebu. Tak by znala tá otázka. Ale ja by som si asi nehádzal ani. Pretože ako som povedal, nikto z nich nie je dostatočne veľký šmak na to, aby som ho volil. A nemá zmysel pre mňa voliť niekoho, koho nevniem ako dostatočne veľký šmak. Nevidím v tom zmysel. Čo tam tí kokoti zase robia? Len tí noví holubovia iba strašné problémy, ktorí toho chodia, ktorí sem chodia, nechám na čo sem chodia. Tu nič nie je pre nich. Spôsobuje to nemalé konflikty. Neviem, čo sem prišli. To dáva zmysel, že sem prišli. Táto žena robí strašné problémy. Neskutočné problémy sa tam zase dejú. Fuck. Neskutočné problémy sa tam zase dejú. No, už odišli. Teda. Teraz potom, aby sa henta žena stiahla z tej lišty. Potom by sa stiahla, aby tam nestála. Odísť z tej lišty. A hlavne sa nevykať dole. Môžeš odísť z tej lišty. A netočiť sa sem, nie že sa vykadíš dole, ty hovno. Môžeš odísť z tej lišty. Alebo odlet do prdala, ešte lepšie. Ale rýchlo odlet, nie že 2 hodiny budeš tam stáť a pozerať. No stojí tam jak hovno. Damn. No a čo tam stojíš? Áno, to bolo, to som dostal tie žalúdočné problémy. Áno, ak nebude do týždňa, čo je dneska, do budúce útorka, ak nezaženem mu ten mas, a nezaženem Halka, budem musieť prejsť na ten mas. Ak to sa nedá dať, pokiaľ nič nejem, tak nevytočím potkana. To ja dokážem 4 mesiace vytočiť potkana bez jedla. Ako je mi to veľmi ľúto, ale na to nemám kapacitu ani ja, aby som s minimálnym jedlom vytočil 4 mesiace potkana. To nedáme. To nedáme. To jednoducho povedané nedáme. Môžeš tam prestať stáť. Buď odleď, alebo choď dole. Ani hen ten šedivý tu nemá čo robiť. Tam sú dva šediví, tuším, ktorí tam majú čo robiť. Ale aspoň sa neukazujú imbecilom. To je pozitívne. Aspoň sú na balkóne v kľude. No a teraz sa ide ukazovať kokotom. Mne sa zdá, že tam ešte majú vodu. Nestojí na tom satelite pre Kristove rány. A to sa nedá pozerať. Iba čo tu máme? Čo som tu pozeral? Nič. Čo som tu pozeral tohto?
Of scorpions chambered in 32 ACP, which is I fired one at a tree because I wanted to see if it worked. You know, it's like, I'm going to have an ND boss. He's like, yeah, all right, just the one though. You know, let's see if these things work. And it went into this hardwood tree about yay much. Right. So I'm pretty certain that unless you hit someone sort of right in the right sort of spot, you're not going to stop a human being with that. It'd be like poking a man with a knitting needle that's only that long. It'll thoroughly annoy him, right, but it won't stop him. So we have these sort of redundant guns and some 3 very old rifles, and waited in the woods for the paratroopers to come and kill us all night. But they didn't, which was nice. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the second night after the explosion, and they tried to get us to do some like training and stuff on the field, you know, like bit of fire and movement and basic patrolling and stuff. But it sort of was becoming apparent that this base was just out of action now, and us all staying there was just asking for it. Mm-hmm. So the decision came to move us to a base in central Ukraine, near the city of Rivne. Right. And you know, we basically, after them keeping us in the woods and being like light discipline, you know, no smoke, you know. I mean, I had a little ghillie stove going that some people had made fires and just put damp wood on, so they just, you know, made massive smoke signals. And the stuff, and no smoke, no light, no torches, not even red light at night. You know, we were worried about drones or fighter planes, etc., spotting us and deciding to target another attack. And then they decided to move us in this like 4-bus, just as it went dark, you know, to give any aerial enemy maximum chance of spotting the lights on your vehicle, because it's a wartime. After like 8 o'clock at night, there's hardly anyone on the road. You know?
Right.
It was an 8 o'clock curfew in those days. So yeah, so just as it got to dark, they're like, right, we're going to go in a big convoy of buses with police cars escorting us with the blue light strobing. You're all like,
Oh, they're famously difficult to see from the
we're
air.
all going to die, aren't we? We're unarmed. We have 2 saloons of Ukrainian officers with like AKs guarding us. 300 guys on the bus because I think I might have missed a bit there, but there was a thing called the Great Desertion in this time. What I call it the Great Desertion, where about 600-700 people either went home or went off to join some other unit or some other militia in Ukraine that they thought would be better, that they thought would give them all their equipment straight away and allow them to shoot lots of Russians without ever getting shelled, which seems to be a fantasy that sadly a lot of people have entertained when they volunteered in Ukraine. There's a sweet spot of the war where you can just go pew, pew, pew and shoot the Russians, and you won't be getting horribly shelled and mortared and fired at by tanks and cluster bombs and stuff while you're going pew, pew, pew. Anyone wanting to volunteer, there's no sweet spot like that. If you're fighting the Russians, you're getting horribly shelled, right? No one gets the Call of Duty experience, you know. The artillery strike is on all the time. So all these people left.
Right, so down to 300.
Down to
They go on
300,
coaches.
go on coaches. We go to we go to a base in central Ukraine. They told us we were staying at tents in the forest, and they put like 8 to 10 tents, big scout, army scout camp type tents, with a wood burner and stuff. They put these in a block in the middle of a field, right next to each other, regimentally straight. One bomb would have just killed everyone. So and immediately as we arrived there, we haven't been told anything. We're taking you to the base. Okay. We get out of the bus in the dark, in some field. They take us through this field, sort of ditches and stuff like that, not terrain that encourages you to go wandering around exploring, into these tents. And then suddenly a military truck just pulls up out of everywhere. And our commander's like, shit, go, hide. We don't know who these are. Right? This could be Russians, this could be separatists, could be Spetsnaz. And it turned out it was some local Ukrainians delivering wood for us. but it was everything was so chaotic in the early days. I mean, last Ukrainians, they were doing their best, but they'd never dealt with this situation before. And just finding enough people to sort of run this and organise this whole new thing whilst you're being invaded by the Russians is quite difficult.
Tell us a bit about the people. So when you were at the airport, you say you met some guys. Presumably you recognised them because of what they were carrying. They had some military...
No, there was... Hops was in civvies, total civvies. He didn't have a stitch of military gear on him. It's funny, when we got to the Polish border, he goes, it's a bit cold. I was like, yeah, you going to be okay, mate? Have you got, like, long johns and thermals? He's like, long johns? Long things, it gets cold in Australia, mate. And I just was like... Gets cold in Australia? We're on the Eastern Front, mate. You're going to fucking die. All right, come and speak to me in a few hours and see how you feel. And by the time we got to the hotel on the border, he was all wearing my merino wool long johns and a merino wool top and a hood. I brought 2 like green military hoodies with me, and you've already saved my life, mate. And he meant it, So Pops was probably my first good friend as well. There was another Australian who crossed with us called Taz, sadly passed away now. Taz was our second casualty. We were like a trio, we were really tight in the early days. But there was people from, apart from Africa, I don't think we've had anyone from Morocco or Egypt or anything like that. Or South Africans weren't allowed to join. initially,
Right.
because they said that their government said they supported Russia, so they were out. But later on, we did get a South African or two who'd already come through the Foreign Legion, through the French Foreign Legion, and then decided to leave lawfully or unlawfully and join the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. So yeah, we didn't have any Africans, but everyone else, like we have obviously everyone from every ex USSR country, because they all hate the Russians, obviously. Everyone from Europe, lots of French, damn good soldiers, don't care what anyone says. Lots of Spanish, also damn good soldiers, they're not lacking in work ethic or anything like that. Plenty of Scandies, the Finns obviously, like fighting the Russians is just in their blood, that's what they do.
And the Americas, presumably.
Oh, well, yeah, Canadians, lots of Canadians, some really great guys from the First Nations of Canada and from the French side. Sadly, the rest of them proved a bit on the cowardly side. It's the only way to say it. I don't care if you've been in the army for 10 years, if you can't handle a bit of a mortaring, like all the other Ukrainians in our area are taking every day, and you come and you turn back because the war isn't,
So you're saying these are men who'd been in the army for perhaps as long as 10 years, so hadn't been deployed in action.
And
as soon as they actually saw action.
Yeah, as soon as they got, like, what we're talking about, not consistent shelling. This isn't the Somme. We're talking about medium shelling, mostly from mortars, some grabs with cluster bombs, some 122s, mostly mortars. And they turned tail and went home, because I ended up writing a little poem one day called Goldilocks Soldiers. I'm sure you can get the basic concept of that. This soldier was a high-speed, low-drag operator who had 3 tours of Iraq and 4 of Afghanistan. But he didn't like it when the enemy had bigger guns than him, so he went home. And this soldier had 14 years' experience in the army as a sergeant, but it turned out he only wanted to shoot Russians, and he didn't want to accept that part of being a soldier is digging a hole and getting shot. So he went home as well. And there was a lot of, sadly, a lot of guys like that.
So there are a lot of people who've been trained,
Yeah.
But when it actually came to action, they decided that this wasn't the war they wanted to fight.
Yeah, well, it's great being. I've got a lot of respect for a lot of the Americans I met, like the guys from the US, with guys who have got no military background, guys who came from the US Marine Corps, the 10th Mountain, United States Rangers, solid, really solid. A lot of the guys who came with no military background were some of the most solid, because they just accepted reality as it was. They weren't used to having things better or more organised or done differently. And and I think those 3 American regiments I mentioned, or corps, whatever you want to say, they have a history of being some of the more underfunded and hard done by bits of the American military. So therefore, it fosters a more British attitude towards soldiering, which is make do and mend, get on with what you have at hand. You fight the war. You fight the war with the weapons you have, not the weapons you want. And they were some really solid. But a lot of the Americans, the only way to describe them is spoiled, really. It's very easy to be the best army in the world when you can get an F-16 to go and blow up a mortar team on a hillside, But, yeah, I heard one of them going, "We need air support," and it's just like crickets suddenly, like, air support? I haven't seen a fighter plane this whole bloody war. They're all over Kiev, keeping the president safe, We don't get air support, mate, It's a myth, It doesn't exist. And frankly, getting artillery support, it might take a few hours, We can't just get on the blower and have whatever's in front of us flattened. Not at that point, anyway,
What about getting you to a field hospital if you're injured?
Depends where you are. Kazakhstan was done by initially on foot, or carrying people out on a stretcher, getting them into a car. Will be a civilian car. If we're lucky, it's a 4x4. If we're lucky, the 4x4 can get close to where you've been wounded. because of the roads and mud conditions and whether driving vehicles in is just going to incite way more shelling, you know. And then so Kazovac, like that was another reason a lot of guys, they suddenly refused to. They didn't want to go to the front because they were expecting half an hour Kazovac, and it's like, who do you think gets half an hour Kazovac in this country? Zelensky. That's who. No one else, mate. Like, you know, if you're really lucky, if everything's like, oh, he's been hit, okay, yeah, he's in cover though, so that's great. And it's like, oh, quick tourniquet on, into the car, oh, the ambulance is right over there, okay, if that, you know, it's potentially you get Kazovac quickly, but probably not. You're probably looking at an hour or two. And, you know, and that's just how it was, you know, like people came because they wanted to fight the Russians, and they seem to have missed out this bit where you forget that you're fighting for a much smaller country that's just been invaded by Russia. So however, you know, Ukraine, automatically you're going to assume, rightly so, that it's a bit less organised, a bit less developed than, like, say, France or England or America, right?
Niente ho
But
la
imagine
notion su
how
questo no,
disorganised
imbecille.
England would be if we've just been invaded by the Russians. Like, you know,
Well,
very, you know, like,
is it at tea time on the weekend?
yes.
Oh,
Terribly disorganised, you know. So everyone, I think a lot of people were expecting to come and just be given, like, you know, they'd step in there and it'd just be like a Call of Duty loadout screen, you know. All of a sudden they'd be like, okay, I've got the helmet I want, and night vision, and the rifle I want, and
Žena musí byť retardovaná, že tam stále
kill all
sedí.
the Russians. And it's like, that's not what war is actually like. People see little videos of the money shot, we call it. You know, they'll see a video of some people doing urban stuff, and they're like kicking in a door, bang, 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 and it's all very dramatic, right? They don't show the whole rest of that day where they've just been in a ditch getting shelled, or while they're doing the pew pew pew, that a tank locates them and starts firing high explosives into the building. And, you know, that's what does all the killing on the battleground. The artillery, mortars, tanks, rockets. Your rifle, if that accounts for 1% of the dead in this war, I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised, you know. It's more rockets, mortars, etc.
So you've made a group of friends, and you've been put into a unit of roughly 30 men.
Something like that, yeah.
Did you have any say into which group of 30 you were put, or it was just random?
There was some, I was always happy, you know, the guy my first platoon commander or section commander, whatever you want to call it, because obviously with numbers going up and down, he was both, you know. He was ex-US Marine guy with several tours, and a guy who has a civilian who'd like run his own companies and stuff. So he's basically intelligent and competent and professional and a nice bloke. So I was like, wicked. I've got good NCO leadership from kind of day one.
Right.
And then but other people did move around a bit. You know, we had a few guys join. Like my Italian coffee pot and my ghillie stove and my mess tins and my ability to make hot drinks that like no one had thought to bring a gas cooker and stuff. You know, they all thought the Ukrainians were just going to provide everything, and nope. So my coffee making, my hot drink little cafe that was running while we're out in the freezing woods after the missile attack, that drew quite a lot of people in, and they're like, "Hi, yeah, you seem to have a really nice platoon here. Is there any way we could, join? We're not that happy over there. These guys aren't being that friendly to us." And it's like, yeah, okay. And then, one or two, it was like, oh, yeah, you're going to have to ask your boss. And then the guys who turned up was like, hi, yeah, we brought you this jar of hot chocolate and this sugar. And some guys got some UHT milk. And it's like, oh, right, do you guys want to join? Because, you turned up with something in your hand. That's the right attitude straight away. So we did have some guys did move around units. I mean, as volunteers, we had quite a bit of freedom to do things like that that you wouldn't normally get in the military.
Right, but you're also trying to size people up.
Yes.
And you're looking not just at the people who are going to lead you, are they going to be competent, but also these people, are they going to just try to rob me? Are they going to run away?
Yeah.
Are they actually who they claim to be?
Yes, we did. I mean, all of these are factors. I remember one guy, I asked everyone to go and get me twigs for the ghillie stove, like, go and find some kindling. You all know what kindling is, don't you? Dead wood, nice and thin, okay? And some of the people are city boys. I don't really blame them. But this one guy had said he was Swedish, like Arctic Rangers, which is like super duper long range, sneaky peaky recce. And he brought me over green wood from a pine tree. And it's like,
look up. If you want to find kindling, look up. That's where the dry stuff is.
Yeah, and
not on the forest floor where it's all wet.
Quite right. And at that point, I knew that this guy
Was a liar.
Was a liar. You know, like it. Yeah, Swedish. You don't know. Yeah, green kindling. You don't. You brought me green kindling, and you say that you were some outdoors nature recce guy. No. This is Boy Scout level stuff. But the modern army doesn't teach all the kind of oldie timey survival Boy Scout camping stuff that they don't do. They just kind of found it a bit redundant. Like they don't even, I don't know if the British Army stopped, the Canadian Army, for instance, stopped issuing mess tins quite a while ago. Everything's a self-heating boil in the bag now. Why would you need mess tins, I personally think they're absolutely essential, and again, that proved to be true. So that a lot of the guys don't have these skills that me just starting life with the Boy Scouts and stuff have learned from an early age. So that was something useful I could do for the unit, but it was also a bit like, oh God, I'm having to teach guys how to. Some guys are like had literally never taken a squat before,
Right.
Some guys were like, oh, it's feeling really rough. When are you going to have a shower? And it's like, mate, we might not have a shower for weeks. Here's a pack of wet wipes, and they'd look at you like, really? And it's like, yeah, be grateful we have wet wipes. You know what I mean? Like,
That's wonderful technology. I'm sure World War II soldiers would have found them fabulous.
The
Wet wipes.
The Crusades, we would have definitely,
Oh.
if they had wet wipes, we would have won the Crusades because you wouldn't have one man die of any sort of chafing related illnesses, you know, that you get along. And the marching would be a lot quicker, a lot less grumbly. Yeah, wet wipe. If I
Right.
could go back in history and give Richard the Lionheart wet wipes,
Yeah.
England would rule the world.
Yeah, because if you'd given him, say, a machine gun, he wouldn't have been able to repair it or manufacture ammunition for it. Really not that useful. But wet wipes.
Yeah, they could have cobbled together something like that in those days, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, a healthy army wins wars. So yeah, there were a lot of guys with just no basic survival skills, and some of them were pretty well trained military people. But you know, they've been 20 years of Afghanistan. No one's had to make a fire over there. You just go back to Camp Bastion every day and eat from a nice canteen or a McDonald's or a KFC in a big truck in the desert. You know, there's no worm stew anymore, or need to know how to like gut a pig or a deer or a rabbit or anything like that.
Or eat stuff that would make a billy goat puke.
Yes, basically. So yeah, we're getting a bit muddled up.
Right. Anyway, so now you're in the new camp, and you've possibly moved these tents that were
Yeah,
all
we've
together.
moved the tents, spread them out. I mean, that took a few days of like. We had a very obtuse Ukrainian commander at that point. The first commander we had was this little chap. He was very fast. He walked around, and he was called. You know what? I'm not going to say their names.
Oh, fair enough.
But it's
Kurník šopa šeďoch. Môžeš odísť. Buď odíď, alebo v kľude sa zaši. Čo chodí hore dole? Čo unavený som. Zase tam je ten dement. Zase tam je, chodí hore dole, ty kokos, jak dement. Ja mu nerozumiem, prečo nejde do prdele? Na čo tam stojí? Čo tam stojí a ukazuje sa jak dement? Jak dement to isté, aby stál dokola. Ty kokos. Jak dement. No nemyslel nevoľnosť od demencie. Teraz skôreného belocha vyhnal. Ako šedeho by strašné problémy. Neskutočné problémy. Čo sa zrobí ten dement? Čo sa zrobí? Ty kokos. No, belocha až do prdele. Neuveriteľ.
Sounds a bit like Bog Pan,
Okay.
and it's a Ukrainian name, so I'm sure with the intelligent listeners you have, they'll be able to work it out. And we have three of them all together. Bog Pan the First, who we would call Bog Pan the Quick,
Right.
Bog Pan the Second,
Mhm.
who we call Bog Pan the Inept,
Ah.
and Bog Pan the Third, who we will call Bog Pan the Quiet, for he never says a thing.
All
You
right.
know? And they were the three commanders we had over the 7 months of the war so far and me being in the Legion. Bog Pan the Quick, who I thought was an excellent officer,
Right.
he just sort of got pushed out by Bog Pan the Inept quite early on. Some kind of Ukrainian officer politics going on there, but suddenly he had to leave, and he didn't want to leave us. And I hope he's okay. I gave him a webbing pouch for a pistol magazine when he left. I was, I thought he was a fine officer. And then we were lumbered with Bogdan the Inept, who was, having, like, who am I to criticise a senior officer running an army camp?
Well, you're a witness to his behaviour.
I'm
off you go.
a British guy who has worked organising and helping to run festivals. Now, festival is almost exactly the same as an army camp, only an army camp doesn't have the entertainment,
Right.
There are people coming in, there are people going out. They all have to have some form of ID and wristband. We need to have people on gates with radios, controlling all of this. Food is served several times a day. This needs to be organised too. There are activities, etc. So it's very, very similar. And a bunch of stuff from the early days. It's like, why are we waiting on a captain and a major to come to the range to tell a bunch of recruits that they can start zeroing their rifles? And why are the recruits out there on the range in the bloody cold and the wet for 2 or 3 hours waiting for these senior officers to come to the range? You know? Why did it take us 9 days, 2 weeks to issue weapons when we actually saw where the weapons were on the base? It's like, well, you could have just sent us over there squad by squad. And they go, a couple of sergeants in there, yeah, that one's nice and unrusty. Here you go. Here's a cleaning kit. Sign your name. On your way. Next shots. I could have issued all our guys weapons in like a morning. Somehow it took a week and a half. Somehow. So there's just, were Soviet doctrine or a hangover of Soviet doctrine starts and were, incompetent starts and were maybe willfully sabotaging the military effort of your nation starts, it's hard to say.
Why would they do the third of those?
Well, if, let's say, you were a Ukrainian, but you're actually a bastard and a Russian traitor, traitor for the Russians, and those people are out there, they exist, perhaps if you got yourself into a senior position in the army, they're in charge of training recruits or moving an infantry company or battalion around, maybe you could claim, if the Russians win, if you're just really bad at your job, you can sort of claim that you're on the Russian side the whole time,
It's a way of hedging a bet.
Possibly. I mean, it's not possible to say, but all I will say is this commander turned out to be so dissatisfactory that the entire of Bravo Company and the entire of Charlie Company flat refused to have him anymore. And there was essentially a rebellion and a petition and enough fuss made. He fired platoon commanders and stuff who just were Finnish officers. So instead of just taking it lying down, they went to Kiev and spoke to people about it. Well, I'm not taking. That was completely wrong to sack that officer. The NCO, who happened to be an ex-Finnish officer. So yeah, we managed to get rid of him, but it took a couple of months. And there was all kinds of stuff. Like we had under his command, and with the help, obviously, of other people he had like sergeants, and he had his son with him. And he had a sergeant who was his godson. So like the nepotism is strong with this one, And when Bravo Company moved from the base near Rivne city to Kharkiv, we had two trucks with 84 M4s was a rifle,
Yeah.
for those who don't know.
Mhm.
12 Scar Heavies, which were for the designated marksman, which is another very fancy military rifle, and a couple of javelins, and an absolute truck. Oh, and some 240, a couple of machine guns, M240 Bravos, and an absolute truck full of ammo.
Right.
Just went missing in the convoy. These vehicles just disappeared as this convoy was in transit. Now, if this was just some random pair of happy-go-lucky, opportunistic gypsy thieves, perhaps, who just saw these two trucks and popped into it, well, in Ukraine there's a roadblock sodding everywhere. Like every 5 kilometres maximum, there's another roadblock with some troops. And at any one of these, they can stop you and check your ID. And if you're driving a truck full of military stuff, they're almost certain to. So how these two random mystery thieves got away with 2 trucks full of weapons and ammo and just disappeared into the ether, I don't know. But they were very lucky if that's how it actually happened, which is the official explanation of how a whole company's worth of Western weapons went missing. So that's the sort of thing that was happening under him. There was also, while I was away getting medical leave, because after I was in Ukraine for a month and I got Lyme's disease and. You know.
Well, Jeff. So you were in a trench one night, and you woke up with something in your nose.
While we were at Rivne, that base had been attacked as well. We had a drone, apparently a drone strike on the base, and it not our section, but there was another tent city that they hadn't spread out. Again, poor Ukrainians not having as much clout to demand what they think is fair with their officers, you know, because we had quite a bit of clout being honoured fallen volunteers, and they didn't. So they didn't get to space the tents out, and then the Russians fired a thermobaric weapon at the tents and killed about 135 of them or something. It was really quite bad. All young officer recruits as well, apparently. So yeah, that was pretty bad. And this base had been hit. So now, you know, we're spending an awful lot. The bloody air raid alarm goes off, and we're sort of right, you know, run a couple of 100 metres or so, get into one of the trenches that are around, because unfortunately there's a lot of pre-dug trenches and foxholes around where they put us, which was nice. And start, just getting there. And I woke up with a couple of ticks, but one particularly massive fat one that was like the size of my whole little fingertip was just blocking my nose. And I woke up to this like, what is that? Oh God, look at that horrible bastard, you know. And that was then a week or so later, 10 days later, like every joint I had ached, and everyone they weren't feeding us very well at the time. Pretty much everyone had COVID or some kind of common or garden flu, you know. You take a couple of hundred guys from every country in the world, stick them together in a dirty field, they're going to get sick, you know, in the cold with not enough food. And then I got these ticks on top of it, and then a week later I was just like so ill, so very ill. And I went to the hospital in Rivne, and the doctor was not to Western standards. Looked like he smoked about 80 a day and had a bottle of vodka every night. And he just sort of using some very 1950s implements, you know, nothing modern, plastic and disposable, just all like steel, and dip it in a tin, probably in a glass of vodka afterwards.
Right.
And he just cleaned my nose out with a bit of hydrogen peroxide. And you are fine. I'm like, I'm not fine. So I came back to the UK and I got a couple of weeks medical supplies, a couple of products. I got some intravenous antibiotics and then some pills.
And the confirmation it was Lyme's disease.
And a confirmation it was Lyme's disease.
Yeah.
And then the course was 12 weeks, but I only stayed in the UK for 4, and then I came back to Ukraine and had to go through Yaroviv. The base had been blown up. That was still like the induction centre. And then it's a very big base, so they sort of move things around a bit. 20 by 40 kilometres kind of base, you know. And had to go back to Yaroviv, and then they sent me to Rivne again. And this time I was with Charlie Company. Bravo deployed a day or 2 before I got back to Rivne, which was a bit annoying because I wasn't with my mates, but there were still some people who from the original lot who were helping train up Charlie and helping organise things. And there was a Canadian colonel who I call Heisenberg. It's fairly easy to work out what his actual name is from that.
I think I've guessed already.
But he was we were honoured to have him, to have such a senior and experienced officer helping train us, you know, to NATO standards. And I ended up becoming I was with Charlie 3 for a bit and just plodding along with them. But then when we actually deployed, I got asked to be in the company CP. So I was the colonel's
command post, right?
Command post, yes. I became the colonel's assistant, which basically made me a sergeant for a bit. And it was all, you know, I was very enthusiastic about it. I mean, obviously I wanted to go because I wanted to fight, but my thing also was just I wanted to serve Ukraine. And if making the brain and the speaking mouth of our command work a lot better is the best way I can help. And I was happy to. And, you know, you're working with a very senior officer who respects you, so that's an honour in its own way. And then, well, the commander of Charlie, the Ukrainian commander of Charlie, seemed to, when we actually got deployed, seemed to think that picking a nice house for him and all his drivers to stay in was much more important than picking a house where you had radio comms to your actually deployed, you know, your units in the field.
Right.
And that was, after a few weeks of basically being in a CP where I did nothing but sit around and smoke cigarettes and barbecue food for the Ukrainian officers once a day, I had enough of that and I transferred back to Bravo.
Oh, right.
Which caused a bit of a, you know, the Charlie company officer didn't like it, but, you know, I got my way. And then I was back in Bravo company with my mates, basically.
Right, and they had been deployed?
Yeah, they'd been deployed. They'd been, because I basically spent April and May either back in the UK getting medical treatment or back in the base near Rivne, just to basically going through a repetition of what I'd gone through already, just more basic military training, which was good, you know, and I was happy to just be there. But they'd been in a village that was by a large river that's east of Kharkiv, and that's about as much detail as I can actually give for where we were deployed. But they were forming a light infantry screening and observation action along this bit of the front to make sure that the Russians didn't cross or didn't try and push any of the dams and bridges and causeways and stuff that came across this area of water and swamp.
Okay.
And that's what they'd been doing, and they continue to do that as I rejoined them, just in a different section of that line.
Right, and we'll find out about that in another video.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
If you want a deeper understanding of what we've been talking about, then you could do an awful lot worse than visit the website of, yes, I'm aware that this is going to sound very contrived, but here it comes anyway, my sponsor. My sponsor is Audible, which is a gigantic repository of audio files of all sorts, audio books and podcasts and interviews and comedy shows. If it's in an audio format, and principally it's the spoken word, it's not a music specialist, then Audible is the place to go. I typed in Ukraine and got instantly a lot of very pertinent hits. For instance, you might want to understand, how did we get to here? So a history of the Ukraine would be very useful. And they have one of those in The Gates of Europe, a history of the Ukraine. And that came out originally in 2015, which is after the start of the current crisis, but of course before the invasion. But it has been updated since in the light of the rapid escalation in that area. And that's an illustration of how an audiobook can be a bit more nimble than the printed word, because all you have to do to update an audiobook is record more stuff and then upload a file to the internet, put it on a site like Audible, and it becomes instantly available. And so audiobooks can be quite a bit more nimble than the printed word. And there are 2 audiobooks that have come out just in the last few days. So they are one would imagine, bang up to date. One of these is Putin's Wars, and the other one is Overreach. That one's the top hit, and that one claims to get inside Putin's head and analyze just what was he thinking, this man who has normally been fairly shrewd and cautious, but it seems that he cooked up this bizarre gamble during the pandemic and somehow thought that he was going to get away with it. And if you want to be even more up with the latest, why not listen to Ukraine the Latest, which is a podcast. And of course, podcasts can be very, very up to date. And there are 193 episodes of that. And if that's not enough, there are 102 episodes of the Russia-Ukraine War Report. One would imagine of those.
Cool.
If you want a deep...
They've been, because I've basically spent April and May either back in the UK getting medical treatment or back in the base near Rivne, basically going through a repetition of what I'd gone through already, just more basic military training, which was good, and I was happy to just be there. But
Yes.
they've been in a village that was by a large river that's east of Kharkiv, and that's about as much detail as I can actually give for where we were deployed. But they were forming a light infantry screening and observation action along this bit of the front to make sure that the Russians didn't cross or didn't try and push any of the dams and bridges and causeways and stuff that came across this area of water and swamp.
Okay.
And that's what they've been doing, and they continue to do that as I rejoin them, just in a different section of that line.
Right. And we'll find out about that in another video.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
If you want a deeper understanding of what we've been talking about, then you could do an awful lot worse than visit the website of, yes, I'm aware that this is going to sound very contrived, but here it comes anyway, my sponsor. My sponsor is Audible, which is a gigantic repository of
And if you wear a tuxedo in the air, they think it's the March of Dimes. So I didn't want to make any, I don't think it was a telethon. So pardon my appearance. It's amazing to be in a room. This is far more people than live in the town that I live in. I haven't been in an elevator in 3 years. That's how remote my life has become. So it's very cool, or worn socks for that matter, to be in a room full of nice people. And I want to thank you, Father Scalia, wherever you are. That invocation, for some reason, that really got me. Yeah, it did. And actually, I'll just tell you, since it's just us and no one's watching, that it reminded me that I don't pray enough for the country, and I should. And I'm upset. But the answer is to include the country in your prayers. So thank you for reminding us of that. Anyway, thank you. I just want to start by saying that I'm grateful to be here, and I want to tell you why I am here. There are two specific reasons. The first and most immediate is that during this fall's midterm elections, I got almost every single call wrong. I typically don't weigh in on races because, what do I know? I don't actually cover politics. I'm not that interested. But this time I got so spun up and so emotional that I convinced myself there was this wave coming, this political liberation that was going to happen. And I told our viewers that in some great detail and introduced a series of candidates who subsequently lost as, the new governor of New York or fill in the blank. And it was so humiliating to be that wrong in public, often wrong, not usually in front of other people, that I thought I've just got to take some time off and think about why I was so unbelievably wrong. So I went pheasant hunting, not that it was the pheasant's fault, but that is kind of a way to clear your head. And I wound up, because bird hunting really is, again, not good for the birds, but very good for you. And I wound up in South Dakota with Kevin, among other people, including a couple of my college roommates. And I was so impressed by him as a person. And really, having spent my life in Washington, I can tell you, if you're not from here, the key question about anybody who runs any institution in Washington is, how false is this person? God sends messages. We can't immediately translate all of them. So I can't tell you what that meant. There clearly is meaning. The point is, the man who runs Heritage is not false at all. In fact, my assessment of him was he's completely real. He's an honest person. He means it. He's not playing a role. And that was so thrilling to me to see that. And by the way, it was confirmed by one of Heritage security people who was standing backstage with me, and I asked him, because the security guys always know they're all former cops. You know, they've seen everything. They have seen humanity in various states of drunken undress. Like, you can't shock them. And they know who's real and who's not. And I asked, you know, what do you think? And one of them said to me, to my face, I would go to war for him. And I thought, and these are the kind of people who will tell you the truth. I mean, like, why would he lie to me? I don't even know his name, but he meant it. And so to see a leader, a real leader at the helm of an institution that matters, that has the kind of throw weight that Heritage does, was thrilling, was absolutely thrilling for me. Because the story of the last decade is the collapse of leadership, not of the population. The people remain noble and decent, so far as I can tell. I still live here, I'm never leaving. We have good people, we have terrible people in charge. And not just of our government, but of the institutions that I grew up in, the Episcopal Church, my high school. You know, I could just go on and on and on. They're all run by weak people. And, you know, it's the same in marriage. You know, weak husband causes angry wife. Weak leaders cause an angry country. That's true. And to see someone who's not a weak leader at the helm of Heritage just thrilled me. So I wanted to come for that reason, just being totally blunt with you. And the second reason is to pay homage and to give some measure of thanks to Ed Fulner for giving me my first job, which changed my life. And to say I was not a promising hire would be an understatement. That's not false modesty. In fact, if anything, I'm underplaying it. But I was leaving college without a degree or a job and attempting to marry my girlfriend, which I subsequently did, and ran into this giant roadblock in the form of her Episcopal priest father, who said, no, you know, job first. And not only did I not have a job, I had like no idea what I wanted to do. And so I applied to a couple of different places, the CIA, if you can even imagine, some boarding school in Rabat, because I thought, you know, Morocco, lower standards, maybe they'll hire me. No. And I wound up at Heritage, as you heard, as a fact checker, copy editor at Policy Review, the quarterly magazine of the Heritage Foundation. And that job absolutely changed my life. I was paid $14,000 a year plus a $100 bill for Christmas, which Dr. Fulner gave out personally to the entire staff, at least half of whom went downstairs and bought liquor with it at the liquor store, which I think is now part of the intern housing. But it was a long time ago. It was so long ago I smoked in my office. That's how long ago it was. That's like riding a mule to work. Just to put it in the context of American history. Smoke in your office? Yeah, I did. In fact, Matt Spalding told me to stop one day, and I thought, wow, this modernization program is moving too fast for me. I can't deal with it. I've always been conservative in the truest sense. But Matt, you were right, and I quit. And anyway. But yes, it was a long time ago. And in the course of that job, though I didn't get rich, to be honest with you, I did learn what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, which was become a journalist. And that was really under the guidance of a man called Adam Meyerson, who ran it, who was, that was 32 years ago. And to this day, he really is the kindest person I've ever worked for. Just kind and patient and exact. He thought I was completely nuts. He thought I was a lunatic. And I could tell he thought that. But he was patient with me through my entire year and a half there, helped me get my next job at a newspaper in Arkansas because no one else would hire me, but he set me up with this job. He walked into my cubicle and said, do you want to move to Arkansas? And so I called my bride, who was a religion teacher at the local Episcopal school, and I said, do you want to move to Arkansas? And what a wonderful woman she turned out to be. And she said, of course. Is that near Colorado? Quote. But she was willing to go there. Very much a Northeasterner at heart, but and we did, and we loved it. But I got there because Adam Meyerson felt that it was his job to help me get my next job, because his job was to train up reasonable people and put them in journalism, even if it meant sending them to Arkansas. And I was thinking about Heritage this morning in the shower, not a place I think about it, but I did today. And what makes it great, and one of the best things about Heritage over time, longitudinally, 50 years, say, is that Heritage has always hired a lot of people. And that is an underrated thing. It really is. Giving people a job, even if it's 14 grand a year plus a $100 bill for liquor, you change someone's life. You put them on a trajectory. At least that's true for me. I mean, I had not succeeded in school, to put it mildly. And I did not feel, but I always felt like I was smart. Not one other person felt that way. Until I got to Heritage. I'm not sure they were super impressed, but they treated me like an adult. Because they had high intellectual standards. There were standards of honesty. And, you know, the idea at Heritage when I worked there wasn't just that, you know, we're fighting this war against the other side, of course. But it did not logically follow from that at Heritage that you could say whatever you wanted. Just because the other side was rotten didn't mean you could be rotten. They really hewed to the highest standards of factual accuracy, intellectual honesty. They really meant it. They did. And even if you didn't agree with them, they were very serious about it. They were intellectually serious people, every single person I worked with. The receptionist in the office at Policy Review was going to school at night to learn Russian. And then the week I started at Policy Review, the Soviet Union collapsed, which was an amazing thing. The coup against Gorbachev in the third week of August 1991 was the week I started at Heritage. And in retrospect, of course, you never appreciate the significance of things as they happen to you. You can't really know what the movie's about until it ends. But at the time, we didn't really appreciate how, well, two things. One, our entire political orientation was based on this war between the United States and the Soviet Union, this Cold War, but very much a war. And every part of our politics, as you well remember, those of you my age and older remember, every part of our politics revolved around that central conflict. We were in conflict with a country that was both anti-markets and anti-Christian. And that put in stark relief our own beliefs and what would happen when that ended, when there wasn't that clear contrast. That's the first thing. And of course, the second thing is we could never have known the third week of August 1991, as we saw totalitarianism die, that it would ever come here. We just couldn't imagine that. You know, we believed that victories were permanent. They're not, of course. That's the first lesson of history. You know, nothing is permanent except our own demise and God. But we didn't kind of get that. You know, if you told me then that this week the Department of Justice would have indicted a group of people I don't agree with, by the way, on a lot of different issues, black nationalist socialists from Florida, okay, kind of not my demographic, but would have indicted them for criticizing the U.S. position, the Biden administration's position on the war in Ukraine, and charged them with felonies for which they're each facing 10 years in prison. If you told me that could happen here, I would have laughed at you. No, we have a First Amendment. That can't happen here, but it has. That and a lot of other things, which are gravely unsettling, actually, and people who were rooted in the Cold War story and the reality of the Cold War, again, my age, 53, kind of know where that goes. So the purpose of my talk, which by the way, I will keep brief. I'm an inveterate talker. I can literally talk forever. You can't even imagine my capacity for loquaciousness. I mean, it has no end. It's a bottomless well. You know, if you dropped a quarter off the observation deck of the Empire State Building, how long would it take to hit the sidewalk? That was always what we talked about when we were kids. You would never hear it. In my case, I can literally go on first. So I will stop, and Kevin and I are going to have a conversation, so I think it'll be much more edifying. But I would just say two things about the present moment, because I think about them all the time. And I brood on this constantly. And then I take every afternoon because fundamentally
Pičný šeďoch.
every day. As a rest, I do, I'm not kidding, every single day.
Čo tam sedíš, hovno?
My whole family does. It's like our one cultural contribution. Oh, we're Swedish. Ooh, it's a very deep ethnicity.
Môžete odletieť šeďoch. Čo tam stojíš? Ja to nechápem.
You should hear our comedy. It's hilarious. But the one thing I do is take a sauna to kind of get out of my head and get away from all this stuff, and I never can, and I just use my time this sauna to brood more. But here are two conclusions I've come to, which I think are slightly less depressing than the most obvious, which is the country's really going at high speed in the wrong direction. Yeah, no kidding. Like in ways that are just unfathomable, and for people my father's age, for example, who's 82 and such a decent man, and I wonder forever about my dad, who I saw this morning, you know, was born in an orphanage called the Home for Little Wanderers in Boston and became a success and the head of a federal agency.
Môžeš odísť, Šeďo.
Sort of lived the American
Neviem, či robíš si konflikty.
possible for people who are smart and try hard and all that. For people of that age, it's too much, actually. The change is too abrupt. It can't
Môžeš odísť, Šeďo.
really, it's too horrifying. But for those of us who are still engaged in trying to figure out what this means and not
Nevieš kľudne relaxovať, iba
I
konflikty
would say
robíš.
two things that are I think we're thinking about. The first is you look around and you see so many people break under the strain, under the downward pressure of whatever this is that we're going through. And you look with disdain and sadness as you see people you know become quislings, you see them revealed as cowards, you see them going along with the new thing, which is clearly a poisonous thing, a silly thing. You know, saying things you know they don't believe because they want to keep their jobs. If there's a single person in this room who hasn't seen that through George Floyd and COVID and the Ukraine war, raise your hand. Oh, nobody? Right. You all know what I'm talking about. And you're so disappointed in people. You know, you are, and you realize that the herd instinct is maybe the strongest instinct. I mean, it may be stronger than the hunger and sex instincts, actually. The instinct, which again is inherent to be like everybody else and not to be cast out of the group, not to be shunned, that's a very strong impulse in all of us from birth. And it takes over, unfortunately, in moments like this, and it's harnessed, in fact, by bad people in moments like this to produce uniformity. And you see people going along with this, and you lose respect for them. And that certainly happened to me at scale over the past 3 years. I'm not mad at people, I'm just sad. I'm disappointed. How could you go along with this? You know it's not true, but you're saying it anyway? Really? You're putting your pronouns in your email? You're ridiculous. You know, but no one else thinks it's ridiculous. Oh no, it's the pronouns in the email. What does that even mean? What does it even mean? You're saying things you can't define. LBGTQIA+? Who's the plus? The plus is invited on my show anytime. Find a plus and I'll interview him. What's it like to be a plus? Am I a plus? I'm serious. I feel like I'm an addition. Does that make me a plus? No one even knows what it is. And the whole society, LGBTQIA+. All right, what's the plus? Oh, shut up. Racist. Okay. So you reach that place and you feel, and this is one of the reasons, Father Scalia, I was actually overcome a little bit with emotion as you prayed, because I realized that I was so upset by the behavior of some people I love, frankly, in a country I revere and always have, that I wasn't praying for the country. You know, that's on me, and we all should be. But back to my point. So you see the sadness happening. But there is, as there always is, this is a fact of nature and theology and of observable reality, there is a countervailing force at work always. There's a counterbalance to the badness. It's called goodness. And you see it in people. So for every 10 people who are putting he and him in their electronic JP Morgan email signatures, there's one person who's like, no, I'm not doing that. Sorry, I don't want to fight, but like, I'm not doing that. It's a betrayal of what I think is true. It's a betrayal of my conscience, of my faith, of my sense of myself, of my dignity as a human being, of my autonomy. I am not a slave. I am a free citizen, and I'm not doing that. And there's nothing you can do to me to make me do it. And I hope it won't come to that. But if it does come to that, here I am. Here I am. It's Paul on trial. Here I am. And you see that in people, and it's a completely unexpected assortment of people. I'm really interested in cause and effect, and as I noted at the outset of my remarks and my ability to predict the future, working on that. But because I'm sort of paid to predict things, I try and think a lot about, you know, what connects certain outcomes that I should have seen before they occurred. And in this case, there is no thread that I can find that connects all of the people who popped up in my life to be that lone brave person in the crowd who says, no, thank you. You could not have known who these people are. They don't fit a common profile. Some are people like me. Some of them don't look like me at all. Some of them are people I despised on political grounds just a few years ago. I could name their names, but you may not even know about their transformations. I don't want to wreck your dinner by telling you who they are. But there's in one case someone who I made fun of on television, and certainly in my private life in vulgar ways, who was really the embodiment of everything I found repulsive, who in the middle of COVID decided, no, I'm not going along with this. And once you say one true thing and stick with it, all kinds of other true things occur to you. The truth is contagious. Lying is, but the truth is as well. And the second you decide to tell the truth about something, you are filled with this, I don't want to get supernatural on you, but you are filled with this power from somewhere else. Try it. Tell the truth about something. You feel it every day. The more you tell the truth, the stronger you become. That's completely real. It's measurable in the way that you feel. And of course, the opposite is also true. The more you lie, the weaker and more terrified you become. We all know that feeling. You lie about something, and all of a sudden you're a prisoner of that lie. You are diminished by it. You are weak and afraid. Drug and alcohol use is the same way. It makes you weak and afraid. But you look around and you see these people, and some of them really have paid a heavy price for telling the truth.
Takže čo sme dostali? 92 agilitu.
Their groups, whatever those
Takže iba
groups
3
are,
agility.
do it
3 agility, 4
And I
sily.
look on at those
To je reálne
people
lúpnuť.
with the deepest possible admiration. I'm paid to do
Škoda, že nemám.
I face no penalty.
Mal by som mať sem na západ na 95, ale to je 95.
Fuck, I can have any opinion I want. That's my job. That's why they pay me. It's not brave to tell the truth on a
Hey,
cable
this
show. If
lad.
you're not doing that, you're really an idiot. You're really craven. You're lying on television. Why would you do that? You're literally making a living to say what you think, and you can't even do that? Please. But how about if you're a senior vice president at Citibank?
To sme boli.
I'm serious. Citibank. And you're making, $4 million a year. And you've got 3 kids in Bedford and 2 are in boarding school and 1 starting at Wesleyan next year. And you need this job, honestly. And your
Affirmative.
is kind of collapsing and you know that. There is no incentive whatsoever for you to tell the truth about anything. You just go into the little re-education meetings.
Arrive at the location.
There's our strength. That's exactly right. We need equity in the capital markets. Okay. All right. So if you're the one guy who refuses to say that, you are a hero. in my opinion. And I know some of them. In fact, my job is to interview them. And I sit back and I look at these people and I give them more credit than I
To
do
je
to
ta
people
pičná,
who
čo?
show physical courage, which is often impulsive, by the way.
Affirmative.
I'm
Ale
not
to,
denigrating physical courage, which I deeply admire. But you interview people who do amazing
to
things.
je táto kľudná zóna.
Certainly.
Proverbial birth.
Jak to je to zóna? Nepamätám si ju.
And every man is kind of trained from birth to fantasize.
Will do.
What he would do when the building catches fire and you hear a baby crying, and so you run inside.
V každom
No
prípade
one is
oddychujeme
trained
tu.
to stand up in the middle of a DEI meeting at Citibank and say, this is nonsense.
Hey, it's Tucker Carlson. There's never been a candidate for president the media hated more than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. You thought that title belonged to Donald Trump. Of course it must. But go check the coverage. Trump got a gentle scalp massage by comparison when he announced. When Trump rolled out his presidential campaign in 2015, the New York Times waited until the
Flital
17th
mám mať.
paragraph
Certainly.
to attack him.
Metavion.
But as well known as he is, the paper said at the time, Trump is also widely disliked. And then they cited a poll to back it up. That was the attack.
Je to
on
má byť
Trump.
Metavion.
8 years later, the Times attacked Bobby Kennedy in the very first sentence of the story. Quote, Robert
Sure.
F. Kennedy Jr., the paper declared, announced a presidential
Certainly.
campaign on Wednesday built on relitigating
Going.
COVID-19 shutdowns and shaking
Affirmative.
Americans' faith in
Dirty magazines for
shaking
sale.
Americans'
Clean
faith
ones
in
for
science.
display
Imagine if
only.
you're an ordinary New York Times subscriber reading that over coffee in your pre-war
That cheap
rent-controlled
guns.
duplex on
Give him
Columbus
a
Avenue.
shot.
You'd think Bobby Kennedy just declared war on the Enlightenment. My fellow Americans, I have come to shake your faith in science. Join
There's some
me
loot
as
in
I
there.
drag our nation back to the medieval period. You'd be appalled. CBS News viewers likely were appalled in its coverage of Kennedy's announcement. CBS denounced
Kde
the
som
Kennedy's
zasajoval?
speech as,
Sajoval
quote,
som to tu.
misleading and dangerous. The LA Times called him a threat to democracy. At the
Nesajoval.
offices of National Public
Ale kde to
Radio
mať
in
Metavion?
Washington, a full-blown
Assaulted
Category 5
ammo.
hysteria type
Buy
thing broke
now,
out.
shoot
NPR
later.
devoted an entire segment to savaging
Fresh
Kennedy,
second
not
hand
just as a
blades.
candidate, but as a
Hand may
human
still
being.
be attached.
NPR described him as someone who, for his own perverse reasons, has made, quote, debunked
have
and
enemies,
false and misleading
buy a
claims
gun.
that undermine trust in vaccines, and who, in his spare time, provides moral support to crazed extremists who, quote, rally under the banner of
Well,
what
that
they
is
call
peace and
liberty
publicity.
and freedom.
Hot dear.
People magazine didn't even bother
So
to
nebudeme
report a
to
single
bien.
word of anything
No
Kennedy said
response.
in his announcement.
You buy,
Instead, wrote
you
an entire
shoot.
story about how his
bye-bye.
brothers hate him. Kennedy's younger sister, Carrie, the magazine reported solemnly, does not approve of Bobby Jr.'s harmful views. His harmful views! Bobby Kennedy's thoughts
nebudeme to
alone
bien.
are evil enough to hurt people. That's been the
Sure.
tone of the media coverage around
Is
Bobby
the
Kennedy
shooting
Jr.
and
for the
screaming
past
over?
15 years.
Not to
Since July
complain, but why did you have to
2005.
shoot my
That's
customers?
the moment the Kennedy
It's
published a
alright
magazine
though,
article
they were
suggesting
all
there might
small
be a link
fish, but you,
between the rise in
I bet you would
diagnosed
be interested in
autism
some
cases
serious
and the
trading.
ever-expanding schedule of mandatory childhood vaccines. The day that story was published, Kennedy's reporting was considered so solid that two outlets ran it simultaneously, Rolling Stone and Salon.com.
Nebudeme to bien.
Unfortunately, neither one of them understood what they were up against. The pharma lobby rolled out the most ferocious public relations campaign in memory, and both publications swiftly caved. Both pulled the story and then disavowed it, groveling as they did. No one in the national media bothered to explain why autism diagnoses had skyrocketed. If it wasn't the vaccines, and maybe it wasn't, then what was it? To this day, there has not been a convincing explanation.
Fuck.
Instead, reporters just attacked Bobby Kennedy. They called him a lunatic and a Nazi.
No.
Instagram shut down his account. YouTube just last week pulled down a perfectly reasonable interview he did with Jordan Peterson, citing unspecified misinformation, and so on. Kennedy became the most censored famous person in the United States. At this point, most Americans have heard a lot more about Bobby Kennedy Jr. than they've heard from him. He doesn't get many offers to speak from big platforms. But last week, Joe Rogan
Zase
gave
ty
him
spíče
one.
nič šeješ.
Here's some of what he said.
Zase aby konflikty.
Kids have allergies. No, and of course we know why. As aluminum adjuvants give you allergies. They're designed to make you, to create a hyperimmune response to foreign particles. And the last category is the allergic diseases, peanut allergies, food allergies, eczema, which I never knew anybody with eczema when I was a kid. I never, asthma, I knew people with asthma, but it wasn't one in every 4 black kids like it is today. So, all of those things. Now, we went from 6% of American having chronic disease. By 1986, we're starting to have vaccines, and we got
Všelijak to je najväčší skurvisi.
11.8% of kids now, so it's doubled.
Why do 5 of my 7 children have allergies? The answer, of course. But it's an interesting question. In fact, it's an important question that deserves an adult answer. You should hold it right when you get one. Bobby Kennedy asks a lot of questions like that. He notices things. Kennedy pays attention to the world around him, and he wonders why it's changing. He's an outdoorsman, a falconer, and a fly fisherman. He's interested in how nature works. He's curious. Not so long ago, these qualities were considered essential to the practice of science. All scientific discovery comes from observation, empiricism, patient watching. Without the willingness to put aside your pre-assumptions and assess with honesty between the smell, the changes taking place right in front of your face, you can't do science. You can't create art either, or journalism, or theology. You have to be willing to notice the obvious. Until you're not allowed to notice the obvious, you should be returned. Imagine you are on a commercial airline flight. You reach 11,000, 37,000 feet before you take a ride. And suddenly you smell smoke. And it's not your imagination. You can see it starting to fill the cabin. All around you, people are hacking and choking. The guy in the next seat has a napkin pressed against his mouth. And he's mumbling what sounds like Psalm 23. Today, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So clearly, the airplane is on fire. But almost unbelievably, no one has said a word about it. Not a single person is acknowledging this is happening. Everyone is silent. So in panic, you yell for the flight attendant. There's smoke in the cabin, you say as if she hasn't noticed. But she stares at you with hard eyes. Shut up, racist, she replies. That's a dangerous Russian conspiracy theory. Stop spreading misinformation or I'll call TSA and have you arrested when we land. That sounds like a fever dream. It's also pretty close to the experience of living in the United States at the moment. All around you, things seem to be fraying and getting worse. Your gut tells you there's something very bad going on, and all the evidence suggests that there is. But the people in charge won't acknowledge that. Everything's fine, they scream. Stop noticing. But wait, I don't remember this many kids having allergies or asthma or eczema or autism or for that matter, body dysmorphia. And why so many suicides? What's going on here? Shut up! Stop asking questions! That's their answer. But Bobby Kennedy won't stop asking, and that's why they beat him. As Kennedy spoke on the Rogan show, reported from Vice.com called Anna Merlin. Merlin was so enraged by what she saw that she dashed off an article attacking Joe Rogan's employer for allowing the conversation to take place. Spotify has stopped even sort of trying to stem Joe Rogan's vaccine misinformation. The piece never even described much of what Kennedy had actually said. Merlin dismissed his entire interview as, quote, a detailed survey of Kennedy's most dangerously incorrect views, a far too extensive list to outline in full. In other words, we here at Vice don't have time to describe all of Bobby Kennedy's lies, but trust us, they're lies. Then, Merlin told Spotify that he should get the episode censored, much to his profound frustration. Spotify refused to censor the episode website. So she spent the next several days ranting about all of this on Twitter. People were listening to the wrong things, and Anna Merlin was mad about it. So was Peter Hotez. Hotez is a pediatrician from Texas who became moderately famous on MSNBC during the COVID lockdown as a Biden show and a vaccine promoter. Hotez read Anna Merlin's piece and then huffily retweeted it. Effectively, why is Bobby Kennedy allowed to talk in public? And that gave Joe Rogan an idea. Why not have Peter Hotez debate Bobby Kennedy on his show? You claim he's wrong, why don't you explain why he's wrong? That seemed fair. But Hotez wouldn't bite. So Rogan offered to give $100,000 to Hotez's favorite charity if he agreed to come on. Soon others made their own pledges, and the pot swelled to over $1 million. But still, Peter Hotez wouldn't come. Instead, he scampered back to MSNBC, where one of the channel's oilier hosts assured him he was doing the right thing by dodging the debate. Arguing with Bobby Kennedy is morally equivalent to debating a Holocaust denier, the host said. No decent person would do that. And of course, Hotez agreed. Quote, 200,000 Americans needlessly perished because they believed the anti-vaccine disinformation and refused to take a COVID shot. So really, talking to Bobby Kennedy would be a lot like abetting murder. And Peter Hotez, MD, PhD, was not going to do that. But wait a second, you ask yourself. Let's think about those numbers. 200,000 people
Go.
died because of vaccine disinformation from Bobby Kennedy and people like him? How do we know that? Is that really science? No, it's not science. Because we don't know that. We can't know that. There is no way to know that. You doubted me. Arrest us. It's a horrifying outburst. You think if you were on tape saying, shame. But Peter Hotez is not ashamed. He's become even more grandiose. Hotez has written a self-congratulatory new book called The Deadly Rise of Anti-Science. A scientist's warning, as if you were a scientist. Here's how Hotez describes himself in the book's promotional literature. Quote, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, one renowned scientist in his famous bow tie, appearing daily on major news networks such as MSNBC, NPR, and BBC, and others, Dr. Peter J. Hotez often went without sleep, working around the clock to develop a non-profit COVID-19 vaccine and to keep the public informed. During that time, he was one of the most trusted voices on the pandemic and was even nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for his selfless work. He also became one of the main targets of anti-science rhetoric that gained traction through conservative news media. End quote, though we could go on. So here you have a renowned scientist, selfless, trusted, going without sleep, self-denying, persecuted by extremists for daring to tell the truth. The Albert Schweitzer of cable news. That's Dr. Peter J. Hotez. The fact that a partisan buffoon like Peter Hotez can describe himself this way with a straight face and the backing of a publisher makes you despair for the country's future. But don't despair. There is hope. Hotez will never debate Bobby Kennedy Jr., but it doesn't matter. Kennedy has already won. He's more honest than Dr. Peter Hotez, and that's obvious to anyone who's paying attention. A new Economist poll shows that Kennedy is more popular and far less hated than either major party frontrunner. After almost 20 years of being silenced, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is being heard. And why wouldn't he be? Kennedy's theories about vaccines may be right, may be partially right, they could be even utterly wrong. No one's proved it either way. But what we can say with certainty is that America's medical establishment has beclowned itself for all time. Its official positions on vaccines, psychiatric drugs, puberty blockers, reassignment surgeries, a long list of other politically fashionable priorities have no connection whatsoever to legitimate science. It's all effectively witchcraft. At the annual meeting of the American Medical Association in Chicago last week, for example, delegates issued a statement attacking the body mass index as a tool of, quote, racist exclusion, which has caused historical harm. Next year, they will denounce thermometers and stethoscopes. They're insane. Compared to them, Bobby Kennedy is a mainstream figure, and people understand that. That's why he's winning. And you know he's winning by how his critics are doing. So just 4 years ago, Anna Merlin was regarded as an important expert on conspiracy theories and misinformation. She'd written a book on the topic. Here she is talking about it.
I've always thought that in the case of conspiracy peddlers, it's not necessarily a super profitable enterprise to ask whether they really believe it or not, because I don't know what's in their hearts. I don't know what's in their minds. All I know is what they spend their time doing, which is promoting conspiracy theories. In the case of ordinary people, conspiracy consumers, and most Americans are, to some degree, consumers of conspiracy theories. All the studies that we have show that like 1 in 3 Americans believe in some conspiracy theory to some extent. For the people in the very sort of deep end of the conspiracy pool, people who are consuming a lot of conspiracy content, I think it's really important to look at the way it helps them make sense of the world and make sense of our political moment and make sense of a lot of times like what's happening in their own lives.
All the studies that we have show that like 1 in 3 Americans believe in some conspiracy theory. Huh? You'll notice the upspeak, the rising inflection at the end of the sentence. That's a familiar tick in Brooklyn. It's designed to turn a declarative sentence into a question and thereby belittle the listener. Do you follow me? Is this too complicated for you? So the lady in the nose ring wants you to know she's smart, but she's not. When Merlin recorded that interview, Vice, where she now works, was valued at more than $5 billion. Genius investors like James Murdoch were showering the company with money. Everyone wanted in on the future of media, which was up-talkers like Anna Merlin lecturing me about racism and misinformation. Last month, Vice filed for bankruptcy. Anna Merlin is still on Twitter screeching about how her critics are transphobic, but nobody cares. Nobody wants to hear from Anna Merlin anymore. The gatekeepers are transparently ridiculous. Everyone can see that. People have started to notice.
Bây giờ đã ngồi nói chuyện các bạn nó tội lắm em. Để là
3 ngày đầu ngồi nói chung là 3 ngày đầu là không ăn gì đâu mà. Bây giờ kêu mới đầu lẩu sống mà kêu đóng ngon mấy. Sống ngày chín.
Đậu ngồi anh em, nhà nó không nghèo. Nghèo nhất Bình Định anh em. Tại vì nhà nó xây nhà hết đâu, ở đâu có tiền nữa đâu.
Giờ mình bây giờ anh làm mình to cả đất nữa.
Bây giờ nếu mà nói khổ chỉ có mình ăn không. Đúng khổ luôn á, cho người ăn gánh một cái nợ.
Anh trên bóp nha.
Có đâu, thằng đó nó giếm chứ mẹ mày nó chắc cũng thấy anh được nha.
Tôi poster ra picture
Cho nên làm phơi nó em biết. Tại vì hồi nãy anh vào bếp rồi em, cái nồi nước nó riêng và cái này nó riêng.
Čo to za piču sú?
Awaiting new order.
Russia has claimed to have failed.
So you have to remember, this isn't an official statement by the German government. This is a leaked document by the Bundeswehr, the German military, which was leaked to the Bild Zeitung, which is a popular newspaper here. It's meant to be a sober assessment of reality, but because it's true that the Ukrainian counteroffensive isn't going as quickly as some people have hoped. But I was working on this story yesterday for the Telegraph, and it has actually been received quite controversially, not just by Ukrainians, but also by British defence officials who my colleagues spoke to, and they thought that the tone of the report was quite patronising, as did Sergei Sumlenin here in Berlin, a think tanker from the European Resilience Initiative Centre. And effectively, this morning, there has been a reaction already, well, you could say it's a reaction to this, which is that €250 million has been announced for mine defence, clearing mines. So it's true that the Ukrainians are struggling to get it so low, but there is a question of how fair this report is, because a lot of it is effectively the German military, which is not the most experienced, and to be honest, not the most highly respected either, after massive budget cuts in the last 30 years and not much combat experience, saying, why are the Ukrainians promoting people with combat experience over people who've been trained by NATO in Germany? So the question is it the Bundeswehr's place to say that? Is it just them valuing their own tactics and not being open to others? I think it's fair to ask.
James, now that you've had access to this document, what else does it say about the war in Ukraine vis-a-vis what they've just said about their troops and the training of troops in Ukraine?
So effectively, the criticism by the Bundeswehr is that Ukraine is spreading its forces too thinly across the nearly 1,000-kilometre front line. I think that's understandable. The main tension here is that Western tactics work best when with groups together, large groups of soldiers together, but supported by air force and then artillery, which Ukraine doesn't really have. They're running out of shells, which is why they've had to now use cluster munitions, also quite controversial, and they have very little, practically no air force to support these troops. So what the Ukrainians are doing is they've spread their forces wide to try and find a hole in the Russian defence, but the Russians have dug in very successfully, much more so than many observers had expected. So Ukraine's sort of probing different holes, potential holes in the chinks in the Russian armour, but they haven't been successful at finding that yet. And Ukraine, because they've lost so many casualties already, they're quite hesitant to send large groups together, and also hesitant to lose large amounts of Western weaponry, which of course then they would be criticised for by the Bundeswehr and others as well, if they lost all of the 50 Leopard tanks, for example, by sending them into one area that didn't happen to be the right crack in the defences. So it's a bit of a devil you do, devil you don't situation. That being said, this is a very unique situation. We haven't seen warfare like this in about 100 years in Europe. And I think it's easy for armchair generals to say, and actual generals who are very far removed from the front lines to say, oh, they should be doing this, they should be doing that. But what the Ukrainians say back is that, let us fight. We don't want to lose our men. We don't want to lose our people and our equipment. And so they're trying to do as best as they can in a difficult situation when, of course, the Russian lines are heavily mined, with Ukraine now being the most mined country in the world. So,
all right, James, finally, let's just talk about this continuing war and this Western support of tanks and artillery to Ukraine, is it really working for Ukraine? And also there is the support from the United States in terms of cluster munitions. Will this aid Ukraine in the long run? And there are also other critics who say that arming either Ukraine or Russia is only funding the war. What say you? And I want your brief response to that.
Sure. Very briefly, if you stop, if Russia stopped spending money on military, then war would end. If Ukraine stopped getting funding for their military, Ukraine would end. So this is an existential fight for Ukraine. I don't see that there's any other option for Ukrainian nationhood, but also for Western and European security, than to keep funding Ukraine. And not just throw lots of money, we have to give them the right things that they need. And what they say they need right now is air support and more artillery. And frankly, it's been disappointing to see Europe unable to create and get it on a war footing economically to manufacture enough shells to support Ukraine, because they are really outgunned on the eastern lines. Russia has taken this very seriously, has put a lot of its economy into creating weapons, and I think the West, if they truly want to support Ukraine and they want Ukraine to win, they need to do the same. But many Western leaders are still unclear whether they want Ukrainian victory or they just want Russia to be stopped. And those are two very different end results.
Right, I've been talking to James Jackson, who's a journalist and also political analyst. James, thank you very much for your inputs and for talking to me on Wow This One today.
Thanks for having me.
Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu met the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un while on a rare visit to the isolated country, and this is to mark the anniversary of what North Korea claims as a victory in the Korean War.
Right. Now, Shoigu handed the Korean leader a letter from the Russian president. During the meeting, Moscow and Pyongyang, they pledged to boost strategic and traditional ties.
In his meet with the North Korean counterpart, Russia's Defense Minister Shoigu reportedly called North Korean military the most powerful in the world. This is the first time when a Russian and a Chinese delegation is visiting North Korea since the COVID-19 pandemic began, and comes as Pyongyang is finding ways to strengthen itself against an alliance between Washington and Seoul.
Russian and Chinese government delegations are set to attend North Korean events marking the 70th anniversary of the armistice that halted fighting in the Korean War. In Pyongyang, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu was welcomed at the airport by his North Korean counterpart. Russia, a historic ally of Pyongyang, is one of a handful of nations that maintains friendly relations with the North. Kim Jong-un has been steadfast in his support for Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, including Washington says supplying rockets and missiles. Pyongyang will celebrate 70 years since the signing of the Korean War armistice on July 27, 1953. The armistice ended open hostilities, in the conflict and is known as Victory Day in the North. Satellite imagery indicates the North has been preparing for the kind of large-scale military parade with which it typically welcomes such anniversaries. The inclusion of Chinese and Russian guests this year is a post-pandemic first, which hints at new flexibility towards enforcing border controls. On Tuesday, Seoul's defense minister said it had detected more people and equipment in the North Korean capital Pyongyang. The ministry added South Korean and U.S. intelligence agencies were closely monitoring the North as it prepared for the upcoming celebration. North Korea only resumed some trade with China last year and allowed Beijing's new envoy to take up his position this year. Some analysts say Russia is expected to ask for more artillery support from North Korea to be used in the Ukraine war. Pyongyang is also expected to ask for Russia's cooperation on reconnaissance satellites or nuclear submarines. North Korea tried but failed to launch its first military spy satellite in May. The country has fired multiple ballistic missiles recently to make clear its displeasure at Washington's deployment of submarines to the Korean peninsula. The visit last week of the Ohio-class submarine was the first such deployment since 1981. It was swiftly followed by the arrival of a second U.S. submarine, the nuclear-powered USS Annapolis, at a South Korean naval base. Relations between the two Koreas are currently at one of their lowest historical points. Diplomacy between Pyongyang and Seoul has stalled, and Kim has called for ramping up weapons development, including tactical nukes. In addition, a U.S. soldier, Travis King, is believed to be in North Korean custody after he ran across the border during a tour of the demilitarized zone last week.
The Ukrainian counter-offensive continues, and to get us the latest, we have with us Shivan. Shivan will get you all the details on the same.
Thanks, Him. I'll take it from here. Of course, a lot is happening in the eastern Ukrainian side, and that is what we're starting off with. Now, the Ukrainian forces have stepped up their counter-offensive after 2 months of grueling incremental gains. Let's take a look at crucial battleground updates. Now, Ukrainian forces are mounting a new push in the south of the country. The Russian army said they repelled a Ukrainian attack involving several hundred soldiers near the town of Orikhi in the Zaporizhia region, which is essentially eastern Ukraine. Now, it is one of the areas where Kiev has been carrying out its counter-offensive. An enlarged Ukrainian force with Western-trained troops and Western-supplied armored vehicles hopes to advance south to sever a land bridge to Crimea. Now, Crimea is one region which definitely Ukraine has been extremely sour about since 2014 and has been targeting it. That is exactly where the counter-offensive is moving as well. The Russian Defense Ministry stated Ukraine conducted a massive attack with 3 battalions and they are reinforced with tanks. It's being called as a massive attack on the Russian side. Moscow said that all attacks were repelled and positions were held. Remember, Russian commander in the region, Major General Ivan Popov, was sacked after his criticism of military leadership. For Ukrainian forces, the sacking has added to the sense that this may be a moment of Russian vulnerability in the area.
The Russia-Ukraine war has had multiple implications, some within the nation's boundaries and some beyond. The collapse of the Black Sea grain deal is one example. Another such implication looms over the Russia-Africa summit, as nearly 17 African nations have confirmed their attendance. Kremlin claims that the summit is being undercut by Western powers as it seeks out diplomatic allies in its standoff over Ukraine. The spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said that this is absolutely blatant, brazen interference by the United States, France, and other states through their diplomatic missions in African countries and their attempts to put pressure on the leadership of these countries in order to prevent their active participation in the forum. In an attempt to woo African nations and pull them in as allies, and also in a bid to reverse the effect of grain deal ending, Putin suggested a scheme to have Qatar pay to ship the grain to Turkey, where it could later be sent on to poorer African countries. However, both Qatar and Turkey are yet to agree to this. The halt of grain deal in the backdrop of heaps of sanctions on Russia has led to Moscow into global isolation. The deal was devised to elevate soaring global food prices, and Russia blamed its collapse on the West blocking Russian exports of grain and fertilizers. Russia's plans to, quote, the global south become critical as Kremlin claims that the country's future lies in Asia and Africa. However, the African nations are caught up in their own wars forced by Russia's exit on the grain deal. Multiple African leaders believe that this can lead them into civil crisis as the grain prices continue to rise. Calling it a stab in the back for global food security crisis that disproportionately impacts countries in the Horn of Africa already impacted by drought. Moscow says now that the grain deal is null and void, its military could target grain infrastructure at Ukrainian port cities as it is. Putin's promises to increase trade with Africa to $40 billion a year have come up far short. Russia's economic influence in African countries is still dwarfed by other powers such as China and is being hampered by new Western sanctions. Analysts expected Moscow to announce bilateral grain offers in an effort to dilute the pressure on African leaders while also providing a market for Russia's stranded products.
There is a distrust in Russia's military command. Experts say it seems that the Russian generals are judged more on their loyalty than their performance on the battlefield. Recently, a number of high-level generals have been removed or fired in Russia. In the next few minutes, we will take a look at Russia's generals who have been fired in the ongoing Ukraine war. Starting with Major General Ivan Popov. Well, he commanded troops in the Zaporizhia region and he was dismissed from his post. Now we'll tell you why he was dismissed from his post. That is after he accused Moscow's defense ministry leadership of betraying his troops for not providing sufficient support to the troops on the battlefield. So as I mentioned, that he was dismissed from his post for accusing Moscow's defense ministry for not providing enough support to the troops on the front line. Moving on to our next general, Lieutenant General Sergei Kessel. Well, he commanded the elite 1st Guard Arms Tank Army, suspended for his failure to capture Kharkiv. Moving on to our last general, Vice Admiral Igor Ospin. He commanded Russia's Black Sea Fleet, suspended following the sinking of cruiser Moskva. That's what we're talking about, Vice Admiral Igor Ospin. He commanded the Russia's Black Sea Fleet and he was suspended following the sinking of cruiser Moskva. Moving on, General Sergei Surovikin. He was the commander of Russia's forces in Ukraine and he was last seen in public since Wagner chief Evgeny Prigozhin's mutiny. Reports say that the general has been detained by the Russian authorities. He was last seen, like I mentioned, in public since Wagner chief Evgeny Prigozhin's mutiny towards Moscow, and he was detained by the Russian authorities as per the reports. Meanwhile, Lieutenant General Rustam Mordov, he commanded Russia's Eastern Military District, and he was removed from his post in March 2023. He was removed for unsuccessful Russian assaults near Volodar, which is in the Donetsk region. Well, it's not only Russia that has sacked or fired its generals. Let's now tell you about a Ukrainian general sacked by Zelensky. Zelensky announced Edward Moskolov's dismissal. Now, the Ukrainian president had announced Edward Moskolov's dismissal during the Ukraine-Russia war, and he commanded the joint forces operation in the Ukraine-Russia war. Now, he spearheaded Ukraine's counteroffensive in the Donbas region, and the Ukrainian general's dismissal comes amid corruption scandals in the country. Well, let's move on to other global stories we're also tracking on Newspoint.
The Russia-Ukraine war has had multiple implications, some within the nation's boundaries and some beyond. The collapse of the Black Sea grain deal is one example. Another such implication looms over the Russia-Africa summit, as nearly 17 African nations have confirmed their attendance. Kremlin claims that the summit is being undercut by Western powers as it seeks out diplomatic allies in its standoff over Ukraine. The spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, said that this is absolutely blatant, brazen interference by the United States, France, and other states through their diplomatic missions in African countries and their attempts to put pressure on the leadership of these countries in order to prevent their active participation in the forum. In an attempt to woo African nations and pull them in as allies, and also in a bid to reverse the effect of grain deal ending, Putin suggested a scheme to have Qatar pay to ship the grain to Turkey, where it could later be sent on to poorer African countries. However, both Qatar and Turkey are yet to agree to this. The halted grain deal in the backdrop of heaps of sanctions on Russia has led to Moscow into global isolation. The deal was devised to elevate soaring global food prices, and Russia blamed its collapse on the West blocking Russian exports of grain and fertilizers. Russia's plans to port the global south become critical as Kremlin claims that the country's future lies in Asia and Africa. However, the African nations are caught up in their own wars forced by Russia's exit on the Green Deal. Multiple African leaders believe that this can lead them into civil crisis as the green crisis continues.
Čo je tu? Píkačky.
7th, 2023. Matt Van Dyke joins us in just a minute on his way to Ukraine to enter the battle. But first, this. Hi, everyone. Judge Napolitano here, and let me give it to you straight. I've personally seen what goes on in Washington, D.C., and we could be in for some very difficult times ahead. Congress can't stop spending money. The Fed can't stop printing money. The government can't stop going into debt. How does this impact you? Well, your dollars buy less, and your savings and your retirement funds are worth less. That's why gold is such an important alternative to cash. You know that I am a paid spokesperson for Lear Capital. I know the folks at Lear. I work with the folks at Lear. I trust the $1,000 Lear judgment. Why are you going back to Ukraine to join a military unit and enter the battle?
Well, I've joined a unit to take part in the counteroffensive. So we're picking up equipment to take back to the unit. We'll be deployed in the coming weeks. It's a squad of mostly Americans within the Ukrainian battalion. And we're going to get out there and do whatever we can to help liberate Ukraine.
How is it that Americans have been able to join the Ukrainian military, or stated differently, are you actually, or will you actually be a member of the Ukrainian military subject to the command structure and the discipline imposed by Ukraine superior officers?
Yes, we're enlisted in the Ukrainian military, just like a Ukrainian would be, essentially.
How many Americans will be there with you, Matt?
Our unit, we have about a dozen in our squad so far. We're authorized to recruit more and go larger than that, but we're starting out with about a dozen.
And with the spring offensive having sputtered, with the Russians resisting the spring offensive mightily, what is your goal in entering the battlefield? I mean, why are you doing this?
Well, we bring together a group of experienced individuals that all are highly motivated. We have some special capabilities we're working on with technology and some other things that'll make us a valuable contribution on the battlefield beyond just the gun in our hands. It's what we believe in, and Ukraine needs every person it can get to go to the front now, so that's what we're going to do.
I'm going to run a clip of President Biden. This is 2 weeks ago. He's in Helsinki right after the NATO conference in Vilnius, Latvia. I want you to tell me if you agree with what he says. Here's the president.
The issue of whether or not this is going to keep Putin from continuing to fight, the answer is Putin's already lost the war. Putin has a real problem. How does he move from here? What does he do? And so the idea that there's going to be what vehicle is used, he could end the war tomorrow. He could just say, I'm out. But what agreement is ultimately reached depends upon Putin and what he decides to do. But there is no possibility of him winning the war in Ukraine. He's already lost that war. Imagine anyway, he's already lost that war.
Do any of your Ukrainian military commanders agree with that? There's no possibility of him winning, and he has already lost the war.
Well, depending on the definition of him winning, yeah. I mean, there's no way that he's going to subjugate Ukraine, that he's going to overthrow the Ukrainian government, or that he's going to maintain all the territory that he's currently in possession of in Ukraine. He's really in a difficult situation because if he withdraws or ends the war, he'll probably be killed by his own people or overthrown. And if he stays, he's going to be ground down and probably killed by his own people and overthrown. So, he's just clinging on by his fingertips at this point. It's still going to be like that.
But President Biden's claim that he's already lost the war, I realize there's wiggle room in the word lost or the phrase lost the war as to what that means. But I don't know of any realistic observer who can come to that conclusion and give support to it. Do you agree with what Joe Biden said? Vladimir Putin has already lost the war.
I mean, he's certainly lost the war in that it's been a loss for Russia and for him personally. I mean, it's, war is a means of political end, and there's no political end that leaves Russia in a position that's better than it was before it started this war. So regardless of what territory or how many battles Russia wins or loses, in the end, it's already clear that this is revealed that the Russian military is a paper tiger, that its Russian equipment is not all that its third world clients thought it was, and that the U.S. and the West still remain the most powerful force in this entire planet.
I gotta push back on you that the Russian military is a paper tiger, Matt. They've killed or wounded 300,000 Ukrainian soldiers. How can you call that a paper tiger? They occupy 20 to 25% of what Ukraine says is Ukraine, and what Russia says is already Russia. How can you possibly call that a paper tiger?
Well, those figures you cited are quite high and not the figures that I have. You look at what was regarded as the world's second best military being ground to a halt very quickly against a much smaller adversary, even before Western weapons flowed in. You've seen them unable to really do well with combined arms warfare. You've seen their logistics are a mess. Their morale's bad. Their training's not that good.
You're describing the Ukrainian military or the Russian military?
Describing the Russian military.
I'm being a little snarky with you. I know what you're talking about. Look, the U.S. has run out of artillery shells, so they're giving the Ukrainian military cluster bombs, which, as you know, the humanitarian that you are illegal in 90% of the earth, not Ukraine, not the United States, and not Russia. But without artillery shells, how can Ukraine possibly push the Russians back?
The production is being increased on the artillery shells. The cluster munitions will provide a way to sustain Ukraine until that happens. These cluster munitions, the American munitions, have a failure rate that's only a couple percent compared to a Russian failure rate of 20-30%. So the concern on a humanitarian level of civilians being wounded by bomblets after the war is quite low with American cluster munitions.
But you, the humanitarian that you are, you're not concerned that some child as yet unborn is going to pick up one of these bomblets 10 years from now and think it's a baseball and end up losing his arm.
It's certainly a concern. With a failure rate of 2% or less, it's an acceptable risk for the amount of lives it can save. Ukraine's already the most mined place in the world right now. Chances are, before that would even happen, that child will be going through a lot of anti-personnel mines before even getting to a bomblet. So really, there's a large task to be done after the war, but at this point, we have to be focused on winning the war first.
Gary, let's play Admiral Kirby. So, Matt, this is Admiral Kirby, the spokesperson for the National Security Council on Fox News, with my friend and former colleague, Martha McCallum. This is about 12 days ago.
What they really need are the 4 A's: artillery, ammunition, air defense, and armor, tanks. And on all 4 of those, we have provided an extraordinary amount of support at, quite frankly, unprecedented speed. Those are the 4 capabilities they need most. And if you look at the packages, we just announced one yesterday, and there's going to be one here in coming days. You'll see that we are really trying to get them those kinds of capabilities. Now, look, the F-16s will get there probably towards the end of the year, but it's not our assessment that the F-16s alone would be enough to turn the tide here. What they really need more than anything of all those 4As is artillery. And that's why the president made a difficult decision to provide cluster munitions as a bridging solution as we build up our production capacity of normal, conventional artillery rounds. That's what they're firing thousands of them a day. It's really a gunfight.
So two key phrases there, and I can play it for you again if you want to hear it. Bridging solution, because the U.S. has run out of artillery shells. So the bridging solution, until we can make more, is the cluster bombs. And the other phrase, which I've never heard out of an American official before, I don't know if you caught it, is turn the tide. So here you have a former admiral, the spokesperson for the National Security Council, saying we need to turn the tide. The same person saying we have effectively, I know I'm putting words in his mouth, and challenge me if you want. We have effectively run out of artillery shells. So as a bridging solution, we're going to send cluster bombs. Add to that the documents that were revealed 2 months ago, allegedly by Jack Teixeira, the Massachusetts National Guardsman on Cape Cod, with the authenticity and accuracy of which the government has never challenged, which show that senior command in the Pentagon expects Ukraine to lose. Where are you going?
Look, he's absolutely right in that there is an artillery shortage, and the cluster munitions are a way to fill that gap until conventional artillery rounds can roll off the factory floor. But what Ukraine really needs, I don't agree with his assessment that F-16s aren't as important. F-16s are very important. Part of the reason that the counteroffensive has been slow so far and not meeting some of the lofty, optimistic expectations that some people had is because Russians had all these months. I was saying before, this offensive had to be done in winter. Russia was given several months to entrench, to lay minefields, to lay dragon's teeth, to dig trenches, and now Ukraine has to push through the minefields. And while they're doing that, Russian artillery is hitting them. And counter battery fire from our own Ukrainian artillery against Russian artillery can't always respond quickly enough. So really the F-16s are needed. We're trying to do a combined arms operation without the key element of airfare, which means that this might have limited success for now, but once we do have air power later this year and going in next summer, it should be a completely different scenario.
Where do you expect to get air power from? The American F-16s?
The American F-16s, yes.
Well, General Miley himself has said they're not going to be there for another year.
Yeah, it's going to be a very difficult summer and fall, and war is not going to be over anytime soon. This counteroffensive is not going to be over anytime soon. I believe we're looking at fighting this again next summer, and the time leading up to it.
Gary, play the clip of General Miley that this is going to be a long and bloody slog.
These are real people in real machines that are out there really clearing real minefields, and they're really dying. So when that happens, units tend to slow down, and that's rightly so, in order to survive, in order to get through these minefields. So they're working their way through it. It is far from a failure, in my view. I think that it's way too early to make that kind of call. I think there's a lot of fighting left to go, and I'll stay with what we've said before. This is going to be long, it's going to be hard, it's going to be bloody, and at the end of the day, we'll see where the Ukrainians end up vis-a-vis the Russians.
You agree it's going to be long, hard, and bloody?
Yes, he's absolutely right. That's what I've said from the beginning of this conflict. I mean,
Okay.
especially fighting Russians in artillery war.
You've been on this show probably 15 or 20 times, and with your travels and with my travels, the fans have been asking for you, and I deeply appreciate you coming back. But when you first came to us, you represented that the Sons of Liberty were a humanitarian organization. Now you've become a military organization. Does the U.S. government have anything to do with the Sons of Liberty?
We've always been a military organization. From our very start in 2014, we've been providing military training, advising, and supplies to forces. It's kind of a new take on your definition of humanitarian, but that's what we do, and that's what we've done for nearly a decade. The U.S. government has no connection to us. We've never received any government funding, no grants, not even when we had our demining program. We've remained completely independent. The U.S. government doesn't tell us what to do. They haven't told us not to do something. So So, our missions are chosen very carefully, that we don't run afoul of U.S. interests or U.S. policy, but we chart our own course, and we're definitely all aiming in the right direction.
How is it that you went from a training organization that didn't even carry weapons to one that now carries weapons and will be shooting and trying to kill Russian boys?
Well, that's a weighted way to put it. In the past, we have carried weapons in Iraq during our training mission. And we've been in combat. We were combat in Iraq against ISIS when they attacked our town. Right now, the organization will be supporting the battalion that I'm a part of. So we will be providing training services to the battalion, to the Ukrainian soldiers in the unit. We'll be providing resources to my squad and to the battalion. It's the same mission. It's just that now the unit we're working with is a unit that I also personally have to be in, which will allow us to be even more efficient and effective in our application of assistance to the Ukrainian armed forces.
Why do you want to kill Russians?
It's not about killing Russians, and involvement in a war isn't only killing. It's a lot of different elements. But I want to do what I can do to be effective on the battlefield. I never ask somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. I wouldn't be training people to go fight in a conflict. I wasn't willing to stand on the front line and fight with them as well. So this is just part of that component. And
When your unit trains, are you using American military equipment that the Americans have sent over there, or Ukrainian military equipment, or captured Russian military equipment? I don't want you to violate any Ukrainian intelligence on this show, but I want you to tell our viewers as much as you can.
I haven't had my hands on any American equipment. Ukraine has a good amount of pre-war Russian equipment and captured Russian equipment. Not all units are being equipped with Western weaponry.
Will you be wearing a Ukraine military uniform?
Yes, I already have one. I've already worn it.
How is it that a young American becomes a member of the Ukraine military, particularly when the war is not going well? Take a step back. Whatever happened to the spring offensive, Matt?
The spring offensive was during the spring thaw. It's tough to move during the spring, and now we have a summer offensive. I said from the start this needed to be done in winter when the Russians were at their weakest, before they could entrench, before they built up their morale, before they could resupply. I think this came late. It'll make it more difficult. It'll make it take more time, but it can still be done. As for how did I join, the same way I joined when I joined the National Liberation Army in Libya in 2011. It's a cause I believed in. I enlisted, joined, and fought in the war.
How long do you think the war is going to, there's some helicopters flying above, I guess. How long do you think the war will last?
I originally thought about 2 years, after seeing the summer pace, maybe at the end of next year, but, it depends. It depends what the going. We're still hoping for full liberation of the country. We'll see. But this war, the fighting part of this war hasn't even really begun. We're just in the early full-on conflict here.
Do you sense an impatience on the part of NATO, and even an impatience on the part of the United States to support the Ukrainians full-fledged? Are you aware of the political leadership in Kyiv asking for President Zelensky to resign? Are there morale problems with the Ukrainian military because this doesn't seem to be getting anywhere? I realize these are 3 or 4 questions at once, but address that area, if you will. NATO losing support, and Joe Biden saying crazy things like Russia is already lost.
Ukraine's a democracy. It's supported by democracies. And democracies are subject to elections and the will of the population. So, yes, appearances of how the war is going is important for voters to back their country supporting Ukraine. That said, though, I don't sense the urgency and the weakness. I think that's being played up in the press a bit because they run out of things to write about. As far as Zelensky, I haven't heard talk of wanting him replaced. Really, Zelensky's a true asset to Ukraine. His ability to engage with the West, him being the face of this conflict for a lot of people in the West, I think changing up and having somebody else at this point would cause nervousness and uncertainty in the West, especially among the populations that are going to vote and support their governments supporting Ukraine. If there's suddenly a change of leadership in Ukraine, it certainly wouldn't look good to the average person watching this conflict unfold on TV and deciding whether to support it.
Once you enter the field of battle, will you have a mobile device with you, and will you be able to communicate with Judging Freedom viewers?
Yes, I'll still have communications ability. I've been authorized by the Ukrainian military to speak to you, and yeah, I'll be able to continue updating you from what's happening out in the field.
Does the Ukrainian military appreciate the show?
I haven't asked. I think they're fully aware that most of your other guests are not on their side in this, but they didn't tell me not to talk to you. So.
Okay. Matt, we may disagree with you, but we wish you well and pray for your safety and look forward to your next broadcast with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course. More as we get it. Governor Chris Christie at 2 o'clock or 2:15 Eastern today. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.
Ale čo je to za ako stranu? SNS? Really?
Aj preto sa dnes stretávame s kandidátmi do parlamentu otvorenej kandidátky Slovenskej národnej strany, s ktorými spoločne prediskutujeme otázky aktuálneho politického diania. Vítam medzi nami slávneho politologa, spisovateľa, vplyvného youtubera.
Ďakujem. A ja by som asi ospravedlnil, lebo teraz mi práve písal Tomáša Taradu. Veľmi sa tešil na stretnutie s vami, len keď išiel cez Žilinu, tam bola extrémna prietrž mračien, tam sa nedalo prejsť pri semafory a tak ďalej, tak mi volal, že bude chvíľu meškať. Teraz mi písal, že 15 minút, tak vravel, nech nečakáme na ňo, nech to teda začneme. On, keď to zaparkuje, príde, tak plynule budeme pokračovať, takže príde, je na ceste, vidím, že slniečko nám vyšlo spoza mrakov, tak verím, že to bude dobrá debata takýchto vecí.
Teda poslanec Národnej rady a vyštudovaný ekonóm a politológ Tomáš Taraba, ten kandiduje do parlamentu s číslom 5. A diskusiu vás budem sprevádzať ja, moje meno je Rebeka Riabová, kandidujem s číslom 51. Ja položím pár otázok diskutujúcim a následne necháme priestor aj vám, divákom, aby ste sa pýtali otázky.
Na tej fotke, keď chudá. A aj na tej fotke, keď chudá, to vyzerá aká tučná. Silná káva.
Michalko, aká je perspektíva SNS, aké sú trendy, vyšli nejaké prieskumy, tuším, že v troch mala SNS-ka cez 5%. Bol jeden nejaký najnovší od takej menej známej agentúry, tam to bolo pod 5%. A potom ešte poprosím aj o analýzu nezverejneného prieskumu Hlasu, ktorý SNS dáva až 5,7%. Aký teda vývoj očakávate?
No, trend je jasný. Viete, pred takými 10, 8, 9 mesiacmi som mal ťažkú depresiu, že prepadne 15-14 mandátov pre opozičné strany. Obával som sa, a to je bohužiaľ asi nemenná skutočnosť, že hlasy, ktoré dajú ľudia pre SNS, sú definitívne stratené, preto lebo nikto nepôjde do koalície s Kotlebom, to už je viac menej jasné, ani sa s ním nikto nespojí. A vlastne tie percentá, on tam zobral tiež nejakých ľudí aj mimo stranických štruktúr, pravdepodobne je možné, že dá 3%, čo je tak 5-6 mandátov, ale do parlamentu sa s veľkou mierou pravdepodobnosti nedostane. Do istej miery SNS predtým, než otvorila kandidátku, bola podobná, mala okolo 3%. A sumár týchto hlasov by naozaj dal 6 a 6, 12 mandátov, a tie budú strašne chýbať. Preto som bol frustrovaný a čakal som teda, či nejaká racionalita preváži, či pochopia ľudia, že ega a stranický egoizmus nie je tá správna cesta, ale že treba zintegrovať celú národnú scénu. Celá národná scéna sa samozrejme zintegrovať nemôže, lebo samozrejme v politike častokrát funguje aj faktor silného ega. Ľudia v tomto verejnom priestore častokrát preceňujú svoje schopnosti a tak. A niekedy to je dobré, lebo sú naozaj aj niektorí ľudia, ich nebudem menovať, s ktorými sa jednoducho nedá. V politike musí byť aj tímový hráč. Tam nemôžete byť iba solidné. Samozrejme musíte mať nejaké posolstvo, musíte mať nejaký výtlak, musia vás ľudia poznať, ale zároveň musíte sa vedieť aj skoordinovať, dohodnúť a tak ďalej. No a je o mne známe, že som teda kritizoval Danka konkrétne, ale my sme sa tak poznáme sa 15 rokov a aj sme sa tak rozprávali a ja som povedal, pozri sa, keď urobíš dobrú vec, ja ťa kľudne pochválim, a naozaj sa stalo. Skrátka, po jednej takej spoločenskej akcii, kde slovo dalo slovo, istá iná osoba mu dala tento nápad, že naozaj tá cesta spájania je jednoznačná a jediná možná. A potom som zistil z médií, že už sedeli strana Patriot, strana, vtedy ešte aj komunisti, ešte boli tam nejakí ďalší, bola tam národná koalícia. No ja som v svojom štandardnom komentári povedal, že fajn, toto je cesta. Naozaj toto je cesta, neprepadnúť hlasy, zintegrovať ľudí, ktorí majú čo povedať. Viete, a tam ešte je taká tá synergická vec, že sú niektorí ľudia, ktorí majú schopnosť osloviť oveľa väčší potenciál ľudí, ako oslovia, ak sú na nejakej kandidátke teda malej strany, pretože ja by som mu aj dal, ale môj hlas prepadne. Že keď ten človek je súčasťou niečoho iného, poviem to klasický príklad, hej. Bekmatov sa dostal na kandidátku Smeru. Hovorím to ako príklad, nie že by toto. On, keby išiel sám, tak získa 7, 8, 9 tisíc. Keď je na tej kandidátke aj mnoho smerákov, si povie, dáme mladému, ambicioznému, schopnému človeku, chodil po všelijakých týchto, jeho potenciál je kľudne cez 15, cez 20 tisíc, ktoré dostane on, lebo vedia ľudia, že ten hlas neprepadne. A ja som presvedčený, že to isté sa môže stať pri Tarabovi, ktorého by možno nevolili, ak by išiel na vlastnej kandidátke, Huliakovi, ktorý bol brutálny výsledok v Banskobystrickom kraji, mal 23 tisíc hlasov v jednom kraji. Hej. Neznamená to, že krát 8 a máme 160 tisíc, potom by mal 8%, ale o to nejde. Ide o to, že ten potenciál je a tie hlasy neprepadnú. Neprepadnú hlasy, ktoré by dostali oni ako osoby, ale v rámci väčšieho celku vedia tí ľudia, že ten hlas sa dostane tam, kde patrí, do parlamentu, do Národnej rady. Máme na kandidátke Lučanského, máme na kandidátke Adama Lučanského, teda syna Milana Lučanského, ktorý je obrovským vykričníkom, to, čo táto brachiálna moc urobila. Verím a dúfam, že nikto z nás neverí oficiálnej verzii tej tragédii a verím a dúfam, že raz sa dozvieme, ako to bolo naozaj. A verím a dúfam, že mnohí ľudia, napríklad Kolíková, budú mať ešte horúce chvíle. No, sú tam ľudia ako 5-násobný župan Belica, že naozaj celá tá národná, nebudem všetkých teda hovoriť, ale celá tá národná pospolitosť, jednoducho tie osobnosti prišli tam, prišli na otvorenú kandidátku. A nie preto, že by všetci si mysleli, že ja neviem, SNS je dokonalá, ale preto, že je to substrát, že je to strana, ktorá dá jadrové mať nejaké 3%. A tie osobnosti, tí legionári, tí ľudia zvonku musia dať minimálne okolo 2%, ale tam môže vzniknúť tzv. Synergický efekt alebo efekt gule a ono to môže rásť. Viete, strašne dlho. Prvé prieskumy, druhé v marci, v apríli stále bolo 3,6, 3,7, potom išlo cez 4 a dlho sme čakali, kedy sa to prelomí cez tú 5. Naozaj teraz už píšu ľudia, ktorí neznášajú SNS-ku, že bude za dverami, nie pred dverami parlamentu. Tuším, Maďarič napísal v štandarde, že ľudia, ktorí z duše neznášajú SNS-ku, tak už o nej píšu ako relevantnom hráčovi, aby mobilizovali druhých, aby to tak nebolo. Čiže naozaj SNS-ka sa stala relevantným hráčom a môže byť to, čomu sa hovorí rozdielový hráč, lebo naozaj, viete, môžeme potom hovoriť o tých scenároch, aké sú, ktoré budú po voľbách, ale extrémne ťažko by sa zostavovala vláda bez SNS-ky. Naozaj. A keď tam bude, je možné v rôznych teda alternatívach, keď napríklad nastane to, čo môže nastať, viete, že prepadnú niektoré hlasy koaličné, že naozaj, že bude možno aj trojkoalícia Smeru, SNS-ky a Republiky, že možno ani hlas, ktorý mnohí ľudia majú problém, teda hlavne s jeho výberom, nebude nutný, nebude potrebný. Ak bude, tak samozrejme za úplne iných programových záležitostí. Čiže preto je to dôležitý hráč. Ja verím a dúfam, že my chodíme medzi ľudí natáčame. Naozaj nikto to nepodceňuje. Chceme dať tú ponuku, chceme ukázať, čo prinášame. A verím, že táto ponuka bude vyslyšaná a že nakoniec to rezultuje, že SNS-ka sa znova po 4 rokoch, 3,5 roku vráti na politickú stranu, že potom sa zintegruje a viete, tam je, možno prezradzam nejaké také dlhšie vízie, ale sú tzv. catch-up strany, to znamená strany, ktoré dokážu širšie spektrum. Teraz, keď prišli konzervatívci kresťanskí, tak otvorí sa možno aj tento rozmer, že silne veriaci ľudia tam budú mať nejakú frakciu, nejakých ľudí, ktorí reprezentujú ich politiku. Bude tam mať ľudí, ktorí sa napríklad ľudia, ktorí sa venuje
On si myslí, že bude dosť hlasov na vytvorenie trojkoalície Republika, Smer a SNS. Neexistuje. Tomu dávam 1% šancu, 0,5. Neexistuje, že Smer, Republika a SNS budú mať dosť hlasov na to. Neexistuje. Neexistuje. Tá SNS sa podľa mňa nedostane do parlamentu, si myslím. Neexistuje. 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 Trojkoalícia, to by museli tam prepadnúť nejakí šmaci. Museli by to naozaj Kotleb aj dostať do parlamentu. A ešte nejakí šmaci. Museli by sa dve strany dostať do parlamentu a SNS by sa dostala, aby to bolo teoreticky možné. Ako Michalko je dosť naivný. Masívne naivný. Naivista jak hrob. Najistá ako hrom. Pellegrini ho nemajú radi? Really? Nemajú radi vlas? Zaujímavé. Neexistuje, že uhrík dostane nejakých 10% alebo 9 alebo 8. Neexistuje. Uhríkovci budú radi, keď dostanú 7. SNS bude rada, keď bude mať 6. Smer, keď mal 19, dajme tomu. Neexistuje. 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 Emergency backup.
Well, you don't see angry sizable salamanders do that every day.
To bude veľmi jednoducho. My si to predstavujú veľmi jednoducho.
Outstanding work, moonshiners. I don't think I've ever seen the top so full. You've really outdone yourself.
Neexistuje. Michalko má veľké oči. Veľmi veľké oči. Neviem, či vníma realitu. A tak on to asi náschvál tak hovorí, aby udržal voličov, ale SNS bude mať problémy dať 5%. Masívne problémy. SNS bude mať masívne problémy dostať sa do parlamentu. Masívne. Myslím, že jemu je to jasné. On si chce udržať voličov, tak to musí povedať tak, ako to nie je. Lebo keby povedal, že SNS bude mať masívne problémy dostať sa do parlamentu, riskuje, že stráti voličov. Takže takto nejako je, no, takto nejako je. Tá filozofia je veľmi jednoduchá. Tá filozofia je veľmi jednoduchá. Nemôže povedať, že SNS bude mať masívne problémy dostať do parlamentu. Bo tým pochoval samého seba. Ale tak ako ja im rozumiem. Ja zase každý považujem za seba, že vždy povie pravdu, ale niekedy nemôžeš povedať veci ako sú, pretože to nie je nie je to dobrý strategický ťah.
Poľnohospodárstvu, lesníctvu, životnému prostrediu, ale nie je tak ako Budaj, ktorý na rozdiel od neho vám nebude hovoriť, že medveď je vegetariána, že treba sa s ním tancovať a treba ho chrániť za každú cenu. Aj taký ten rozumný, zemitý, sedliacky rozum v tom najlepšom slova zmysle. Budú tam ľudia, ktorí majú veľké skúsenosti z riadenia napríklad župy, budú tam ľudia, ktorí sú mediálne podkutí, ktorí vedia, čo treba urobiť aj v mediálnych zákonoch, čiže tá ponuka je naozaj vylepšená, vyšľachtená a má čo ponúknuť a verím, že bude atraktívna pre voličov.
Aké sú nejaké také najideálnejšie kombinácie strán po voľbách, ak by prešla SNS-ka?
No, toto je naozaj veštenie z tejto ešte není kávová usadenina, ale dobre. Ja môžem povedať teda najkatastrofickejší a najideálnejší a potom pravdepodobne niečo medzi tým bude ako realita. Tak neviem, chcete najprv najlepší či najhorší? Najhorší, tak povedzme si to úplne čo môže najhoršie sa stať? Najhoršie sa môže stať, že progresívci sa spoja s Hlasom a so Sulíkom a s KDH-kmi, ktorí vždy, keď mohli, tak zradili. KDH išlo s Demokratickou úniou, s VPN-kou, z SDK, z SDK-u, z ANO, s Osaskou a teraz Fero Mikloško hovorí, že však tí progresívci, to je úplne pohoda. Tieto 4 strany, ak by všetky prešli, tak môžu dať väčšinu. A čo by nastalo je úplne jednoznačné, ešte sa k tomu asi vrátime, ale napríklad tie posledné výmysly progresívcov, ktorí chcú dať do trestného zákona s palkou 3 roky hanobenie rodovej identity. Preboha, povedzte mi, čo je to rodová identita? Keď niekto si myslím, že som jedna zo 72 pohlaví a ja poviem, ty choď k psychiatrovi a za toto ma môže zažalovať a môže mi hroziť 3-ročné väzenie. Čiže preboha, kde to ideme? A plus mnohé iné, viete, že progresívci hovoria o tom, že majú vysoké dôchodky, dôchodcovia a podobne. Odor povedal 13. dôchodok okamžite preč. Toto je pre mňa najkatastrofickejšia aj keď verím, že nie je reálna, musíme robiť všetko preto, aby to nebola reálna možnosť, ale táto možnosť tu stále je. Teraz poviem tú najoptimistickejšiu. Najoptimistickejšie bola, keď by sa stalo to, čo je možné, ale nehovorím, že to pravdepodobné, a je to veľmi nepravdepodobné, všetky tri by nastali. Matovič tým, že išiel do koalície, zase je to síce švindel, pretože on má štvorkoalíciu a vydáva to za troj, pretože sú tam 4 strany. Je tam Nová, Kresťanská únia, Za ľudí, Olano. On Grendelovú Novú, kde je asi 5 ľudí, aj Klimek a všelijaký Andrejová a jeho poslankyne, to akože neexistuje, hej? Lebo prečo to robí? Keby to bolo, že štvor, tak 10%. Už taký hrdina nie je. No ale povedzme, že slovenský národ konečne prekúkne tohto podvodníka a povie, že 6,93, to by som mu tak veľmi želal. Už jedna strana mala taký krásny výsledok, takže povedzme, že ľudia budú príčetní a nepošlú ho do parlamentu. Povedzme, že bude ďalej fungovať ten model s KDH-kmi, že mali 6,7 a nakoniec to bolo 4,93, 4,65. To je krásny ďalší odpad. Saska v 3 alebo 4 prieskumoch, v tom jednom, ktorý tu spomínala Rebeka, mala 4,7, raz mala 5,0. V tom nezverejnom prieskume, ktorý si dala jedna strana robiť, je tiež pod 5, že v 3 prieskumoch bude úplne že na hrane, teda 5,00, alebo je už pod. Viete, po tom, čo vystraja Sulík, si myslím, že s 2 ľuďmi sa nikdy a za žiadne okolnosti nedá. S Matovičom, ale ani so Sulíkom. Takže keby tieto 3 strany prepadli a ešte Božovchové, a nedokážem to pochopiť a možno mi to vy vysvetlíte, ja som sa to aj pýtal, po tých kauzách, ktoré má Boris Kollár, si myslím, že to je ďalšia strana, ktorá môže a nemusí byť. V tom jednom prieskume už má pod 5, Vox Politicovi dá tiež 4,4.
No ideme odsýpať Daniela Bového bodka. Dobre, bude to náročné znova? Asi je ťažké.